On behalf of the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health, we welcome you all to today's virtual event, Hollywood and Storytelling in a Divided America. Today, you may be joining us as a celebrity, a writer, a director, a producer, an academic, or a bridge builder. You may be joining as somebody who politically leans right, leans left, or just generally prefers to lean out from politics altogether. But there is one thing we all have in common. We're Americans, and we can sense that something is amiss. We are shouting at each other, talking past each other, and just generally failing to solve or even work on hard problems together. Our partisan divide is growing wider and more worrying by the day. Now, being polarized, holding different political opinions, isn't in and of itself a bad thing, but once our level of hostility toward our political opposites rises to a certain threshold, all bets are off. The cycle of distrust and demonization kicks in, and everywhere we've seen this movie before leads to an unhappy ending. Well, what does any of this have to do with Hollywood or with the entertainment industry more broadly? Plenty. Those of you who dedicate your lives to bringing powerful stories to the rest of us on big screens and small screens, you have a superpower that most of us in America just don't have. You have the power to reach millions of Americans in a single moment with a character or a plot line that transforms our understanding of the world and of each other. With a single narrative karate chop, you can help us break free from our narrow prejudices and our animosities, helping us to see the humanity and the complexity of our fellow Americans of diverse backgrounds and beliefs. You can help us to see each other as humans, not villains. You can empower us to embrace healthier norms of interaction. Now, this might sound like a tall order, but it's not the first time Hollywood's been pressed into service to address wider societal issues. From Mary Tyler Moore to Murphy Brown, from the Jeffersons to Blackish, from Will and Grace to Orange is the New Black. We've all seen the power of narrative to shatter expectations and reshape societal norms. So can we now, in this time of conspiracy theories, cancel culture, troll culture, and stark partisan divides, can we enlist you, the storytellers, to write us a better script? Can you help us all to see that we can live together as Americans happily ever after? Today, you're going to hear from an incredible and politically diverse lineup of storytellers, social scientists, and bridge builders. And through them, I'm confident that every single one of you will gain insight about how you can contribute your unique gifts, your talents to stitching America back together again. So let's explore together the role of Hollywood and storytelling in a divided America. I will now pass things off to Roman Vakalidabar, who will be with you through today's programming. Take it away, Roman.
Thanks so much, Kristen. My name is Roman, and I'm the founder of Pathos Labs, a nonprofit laboratory focused on finding ways that media and entertainment might nudge our worlds towards a more pluralistic future. Like Kristen mentioned, I'll be a familiar face, and I'll guide you through some chat prompts, some questions, some polls throughout today's event. It's going to be an amazing show, which I guarantee will make you think differently about the role of entertainment in hopefully reducing the toxic partisan polarization. So I'd love to start today with a poll. We ask that you answer it briefly before we can launch into the rest of the programming today. So thanks for your responses so far. For those of you who think entertainment won't play or can't play much of an impact, perhaps these next couple of hours will maybe change your minds. And for those of you who do believe in the impacts, we hope these next couple of hours will illuminate specific ways in which entertainment might help reduce the toxic partisan polarization. So thank you for answering those. So, a police chief with a phobia of open water battles a killer shark. with an appetite for swimmers, in spite of a greedy town council who demands that the beach stay open. Anyone? That is the log line for Jaws. Yes, Jaws. Over the course of the session today, well done, Stephen, commenting Jaws in the comments, in the chat. So over the course of the session today, I'd love to engage you all in what we call a log line apalooza, which is meant to generate show ideas and creative thinking around this topic. This is a diverse group of people, including experts from the bridging and depolarization spaces. We've got social science researchers. We've got some of Hollywood's best content creators in the room, as well as general public and audiences here. So throughout the summit today, I'd love for you all to throw any log line or ideas for shows into the chat. And who knows, maybe one day, one of our ideas might make it up on screen. And over the course of the day, I will be throwing some of my own ideas into the chat. And I really hope that you do too. So, I'll get us started with one in the chat. And I hope to see other people contribute as well. And Logline Palooza will be going on throughout the day. So I hope you'll be dropping any of your log lines in the chat as well. So with that, I'd like to pass it back to Kristen.
All right, well, thanks, Roman. Today, you'll be hearing from a lot of folks in the entertainment industry. But before we jump into our main conversations, we got a little something to start the show. Let's roll the tape.
The U.S. is very divided right now. There's a lot of money in division. There's a lot of power that could be had.
Sadly, we are a nation divided. And I know I've tried in my life with my dear friends from across the aisle, I've tried to find common ground and find things that we can all agree that we want together.
And I think that's what storytelling can do. Storytelling can bridge those divides all the time.
Polarization prevents the ability of a society to move forward.
And the media environment really accelerating and amplifying our differences.
Just like any other democracy, American democracy, it can fall.
There was a study of thousands of Americans in all 50 states that found that 16% had stopped speaking to a family member or close friend around politics, which is a really staggering finding. It suggests the unraveling of 50 million relationships.
How do we find how we are more similar than different? Because we are.
I am very much for everyone's First Amendment right, but I also try and listen. I listen to the other sides on a subject, and if somebody can beat my argument and make sense, I'll adopt their position.
Empathy for somebody else's viewpoint, that's the glue that holds a society together.
Well, are we bridging divides, or are there divides that we really shouldn't be trying to bridge, but we should actually stand up to and make all the more stark because they're urgent and they're unjust?
This work is not about singing Kumbaya and riding off into the sunset. We brought together more than 39,000 Americans to speak, listen, grapple together, challenge each other on charged and contentious issues. Given the scale of the problems that we're up against, we need an air game alongside our ground game. And storytellers can do through narrative what mediators do lift in a room. They can help people who stop being able to make sense of each other to make sense of each other again.
I think Hollywood and all the storytelling that implies in TV and films can help bridge that gap.
We make meaning out of our world in story. And even children from a very, very young age understand their world in terms of story. To throw off our own egos and our own natures and climb inside a character in a fictional program and see the world from that character's point of view. And they call this transportation. You're experiencing that. You're rehearsing that for your life. This makes story an incredibly powerful tool for making changes. I grew up on the sitcoms of Norman Lear in the 70s that I thought were shared communal spaces where there were a lot of viewpoints discussed and people lived together in that variety of viewpoints.
A lot of what currently exists has been to create the relatable or lovable bigot. which is very different than capturing people on their own terms as they see themselves and as they want to be seen.
And I think the stories we need to tell the most right now are about listening.
There's a meta perception here that Democrats are one thing, Republicans are another, conservatives are this, progressives are that. When you can create complex characters that have some of this viewpoint and some of that viewpoint, which I believe actually reflects America, that character is showing a complexity of thought to say, I'm neither all this or neither all that. That gives people permission to say, I don't have to be pushed to an extreme.
I think that's what storytelling can do. You can illustrate very clearly a story that shows people, harming themselves because they won't listen to the other side or closing themselves off from the world. And then when they have an experience, suddenly that changes everything for them.
There's a big diverse audience out there, and it's more fractured than ever because of just the landscape of our digital technologies. There's a niche for everybody to go find their entertainment. But the holy grail is that bigger audience that includes multiple demographics of opinion. And if people can understand that your show is respectful of their opinion, they're much more likely to come to it. So first of all, that's an enormous boon to content creators and marketers and executives.
We need to go toward the heat of our differences and not away from them. But we also need the stories to model what it looks like to transform destructive and toxic conflict into healthy conflict.
Can we have a good, strong scene that's dramatic and has conflict, but does not leave the people disrespecting each other? And that's the key. Relationships can really overcome just about anything except disdain. So the tone is what's incredibly important here. These are subtle changes. They're powerful, but they're subtle.
To empower community members and civil society to engage in a national conversation.
And to transform the way the world deals with conflict, away from adversarial approaches toward collaborative problem solving.
I think it's important to have these conversations. Everything is downstream from culture. So if you're putting stuff out there that brings people together, I think that'll help bring us all together.
Creatives are in a position to save democracy in a way that other groups simply cannot show up for right now.
This is an enormous, enormous opportunity for entertainment.
We are in a very dark moment right now as a country. I have never seen this large and that diverse a set of kind of mobilizers. And the establishment of the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is I think, a big piece of that hope that I have as well.
I do believe that this country can be united. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of storytelling. But I have hope, I have faith.
The Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is providing a really important and crucial meeting ground between creatives, showrunners, filmmakers, practitioners, and social scientists.
There's all kind of wonderful activists and academics that are involved with this center that understand that there are things we can do, that we can fix this if we get to work. And that gives me hope.
Storytelling can certainly help bridge the divide. Cheers.
Fantastic. Hearing these perspectives has me so excited for the conversations we have planned for today. And now, without further ado, I'll be passing the baton to our Urgency and Hope panelists, Shamil Idris, the Chief Executive Officer of Search for Common Ground, and Eric K. Ward, Executive Director of Western States Center. Shamil, Eric, over to you.
Shamil, how are you? It's wonderful to be with you today.
I'm great. Wonderful to be with you as well, Eric. Looking forward to this conversation.
My name is Eric Ward, and I'm Executive Director of Western State Center and a Senior Fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Western State Center works within the Pacific Northwest and Mountain States regions to organize leaders, craft policy, and build culture and narrative to effectively manage the threat of white nationalism and racialized political violence in our region. We hope to empower community members and civil society in our region to engage in a national conversation on what it means to be an American and what would America look like 25, 50 years from now? And how do we begin to lay the pathwork to that form of inclusive democracy?
And I'm Shamal Idris. I'm the CEO of Search for Common Ground. We're the world's largest dedicated peacebuilding organization. We employ over 1,000 full-time staff, more than 90% of whom are from the communities whose conflicts they seek to bridge in 30 countries around the world. We were honored to be nominated by the Quakers for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 years ago. And our mission is to transform the way the world deals with conflict, away from adversarial approaches toward collaborative problem solving. And we are just this month launching our most ambitious domestic program here in the US that will focus on preventing political violence, supporting and mobilizing the next generation of youth activists, and trying to cultivate a healthier media ecosystem.
There are lots of things going on, big and small, that are critical to our democracy.
You know, we've moved from a country that really disagrees vociferously about issues to seeing each other as the problem. And so you see people across lines of religion, race, and particularly politics, seeing each other as a threat and not just seeing the issues as dividing lines. We're also more armed now than we've ever been. There have been huge spates of gun buying, and the media environment really accelerating and amplifying our differences. How do you see it? I mean, what are your biggest concerns right now?
I enlisted in the US Navy when I was 17. I was a kid who was raised to see the United States as exceptional, right? We talk about American exceptionalism. And one of the things that I have grown up around is a belief, right, that American government is stable, that it can't be rocked, that it can't fall. But the truth is that we've watched democracies around the world come under fire. We've seen some of them disintegrate into chaos. We have to understand there's nothing exceptional about American democracy, right? It can fall just like any other democracy. And at a time of polarization, at a time of significant demographic change in our society, at a time of pandemic anxiety, we have to be extra vigilant. The real danger at the end of the day isn't that American democracy may fall. The real danger at the end of the day is that those who seek to collapse it can so polarize and divide our country that we'll never find our way back together.
You know, some people say, look, polarization isn't really the issue. Injustice is the issue. And there should be polarization around the delayed attention to longstanding injustice in this country. Well, what is healthy polarization? What is not healthy polarization? How do you see this?
We are dealing with extensive polarization right now in our society. What we should all actually be seeking, not ideological alignment, but alignment over values. I think it's values that unite us more than ideology. Look, I don't need an ideology. Conservatism, liberalism, right? Progressivism, libertarianism, whatever we want to call it. I don't need an ideology to tell me what my values are, how I want to treat my neighbor, my place and role in a community, right? And I think we've become reliant on ideological positions almost as a form of sports and entertainment, right? It's in some ways feeds excitement and adrenaline. The problem is we live in an age where that's being taken advantage of by others, right? Who seek to tap into that. Because by focusing on our ideological differences, we actually never get to the point of understanding there will always be tension in a multiracial, inclusive democracy, right? That seeks transparency, that centers people, that seeks to establish accountability. There will always be tension. But this isn't normal tension. This isn't disagreement over an issue. This is disagreement that is fed increasingly by a conspiratorial worldview, right? That opposing points of view are part of some vast conspiracy rather than just a disagreement over a point and a misunderstanding of one another's values.
I think we're on a direct path to serious political violence right now if we don't alter course. We have the capacity to alter course, and I think when you combine the kind of polarization you talked about, where people see each other as a direct threat, where they see an existential threat to one another, to one another's existence, not just disagreeing on issues, but actually seeing one another as a danger. When you combine that with how well armed the country is, I think that's what leads me to think that we are on this direct pathway. We do have the capacity to avert that, but I think it needs urgent and sustained action. One of the big challenges when you talk about this depolarization is very often people will say, what are you talking about, bridging divides? I don't want to bridge divides with a white nationalist, or I don't want to bridge divides with somebody who passed that law in my state last month, or I don't want to, and part of what happens there is the lack of those relationships of trust and respect has us sort of build up entire caricatures of one another, that the more you build them up, the more daunting it is to reach across those dividing lines. And it can be helpful to remember that nobody is reducible to their most objectionable action or point of view, and that all human beings are motivated by a really complex set of interests and hopes and aspirations and fears. And so for us, the starting point is always around seeking to humanize people. In fact, if I can sort of take you through kind of 3 steps of what we call the common ground approach. The first step is to try to humanize, is to sort of, and I kind of metaphorically, the way we think about it is trying to move people from sitting across from the table, seeing each other as the problem, to sitting on the same side of the table. I can't tell you the number of soccer tournaments we've organized that bring together police and youth groups that have been battling it out in the streets, during the day, but might get together to play soccer together on the weekend. It's the only thing that'll get them together. And you use that to open up a whole other array of conversations and initiatives and opportunities, right? And media and culture and the arts and theater performances are some of the most powerful ways to shift people from facing each other as the problem to sort of seeing the humanity in one another. So when you said, culture may be the last thing standing in America that can bridge our divides, what I'm kind of curious to hear you expand on that a little. What do you think the role of culture is in all of that?
Well, I think culture, whether we're talking about sports, whether we're talking about music, right, whether we're talking about other forms of art, entertainment, are probably some of the last remaining spaces in American society that aren't completely polarized through politics. And on top of that, it's one of the few spaces that are desegregated in the United States. Cultural activity seems to break down at times the walls of segregation. Now, it doesn't completely remove them, but enough so that people can build relationships. The process of bridging looks much different in the world of culture than it does right now in the world of politics. And it may be true that in this moment, the bridge through to remove polarization isn't through political relationships, that perhaps it's through culture and economic relationships that are tied to tangible experiences.
Our organization has offices in 30 countries, and we the work that we do in each of those countries looks pretty distinct because it's highly situation specific. So in each setting, kind of culturally, what's going to click, what's going to work, what might be the right opening is going to be different. But the one thing we try to do everywhere is use media. Whatever media works in that context. In some places, it's digital. In other places, it's TV. In many of the places where we work, it's still radio. And so we produce hundreds of hours of reality television, soap operas on radio and TV, journalist programs with multi-ethnic reporting teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I feel like, and I'm making this point because I know the audience of our conversation we're having today is a lot of cultural creatives. And I don't think cultural creatives oftentimes realize just how powerful culture is in the way that you're talking about it, both as a venue that is less segregated than other parts of society, and as something that has tremendous emotional appeal. It doesn't talk to our head. The solution to our problems here are not actually intellectual debates about policies. It's really about our sense of fellowship and care for one another. And these things are fostered much more through culture, oftentimes, than they are by going straight to politics. I've tried to make the case that common ground, it's in a name of my organization, is not the same thing as middle ground. That what we're not talking about here is compromising with hate, for instance, or injustice. How do you see, this issue when people talk about, well, are we bridging divides, or there are divides that we really shouldn't be trying to bridge, but we should actually stand up to and make all the more stark because they're urgent and they're unjust?
So the difference for me between, I think, we hear lots of words about, centrist or common ground or middle ground, being seen as something soft, right? Being seen as something compromising. But it actually takes a lot of strength and courage to bring one's values, right, into what I call the common good, right? And that's because you're going to get challenged. You're going to get pushed. You're not living in your comfortable ideological bubble where everything you say is constantly reaffirmed and reinforced. You actually have to change the way that you engage with folks. The importance of a center is not to compromise, but it's the place where we actually come to agreement with those who don't necessarily hold our ideology, right? If we are saying that the only way we will engage with people is if they adopt our ideological position, right? We are basically setting up the same type of purist culture that most of us oppose in this moment. The truth is the world is complex and nuanced. We have to be concerned about those who try to oversimplify complex problems. It doesn't mean we don't struggle. It doesn't mean we stand by our values. And it means that we have to understand what our non-negotiables are when we step into the center, right? One of my non-negotiables when sitting at a table, right, is I'm not willing to compromise the human rights of other individuals, right? That's a non-negotiable for me when I'm sitting down with other folks. We may disagree on other issues, but at the end of the day, identifying non-negotiables, being courageous enough to engage with folks who hold different ideas and values is critical for advancing society.
In fact, if you look throughout history, people like Mandela and Gandhi and Malala, they are people who represent both that principled stand against injustice and that unwillingness to undermine the dignity of their opponents at the same time. We are in a very dark moment right now as a country, but I'm seeing exactly the same thing you are. I have never seen this large and that diverse a set of kind of mobilizers concerned with what's going on in this country. And the establishment of the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is I think, a big piece of that hope that I have as well. So I'm wishing everyone involved with the center huge success and more power to you all. And Eric, it's a privilege to have this conversation, to chat with you and listen to you. Thank you. Always
an honor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shamal and Eric, for your wonderful insights. I think when Shamal said our solution isn't ideological, it's about common kinship. It really resonated deeply with me, but I also feel like it might feel hard for us to find that common kinship. So first, I'd like for you all to close your eyes or to think to yourself, what do you believe about your partisan others? And then I'd like for you to think about, just to yourself, what misconceptions do you think the other side has about you? Now, in the chats, I'd love to see your answer to this question. What is one thing that you wish the other side understood about you? What is one thing that you wish the other side understood about you? Would love to see all your comments, all your thoughts in the chat. Mark says, I don't think they're crazy, stupid, selfish, or evil. Julia says, I'm liberal, but I don't only think with my heart. I think with my brain. Openness to new ideas doesn't mean, where did that comment go? Doesn't mean I'm wishy-washy or moderate. Interesting. Well, thank you. Keep the comments coming. I think this is really important for us to think about. So thanks for those responses. Throughout the event, we'll be hearing a variety of industry perspectives. And before we jump into our next panel, I'd first love to listen to our first one from Stuart Coles.
Hi, my name is Stuart Coles, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My research focuses on how people's identities and the identities associated with the media they watch affect their political attitudes and behaviors. So how important is social science research for the goal of using entertainment media to influence attitudes related to partisan and other social groups? Conducting research in this area is critical because we need to understand the various things that influence whether people view or avoid viewing certain media. Even if new content were shown to reduce polarization and improve attitudes toward democratic norms, there remains a challenge of getting this content viewed by all the key groups needing to see it. My research examines why people might either expose themselves to or avoid watching entertainment media, depending on their own political identities. Specifically, I find that people with stronger political identities are more likely to select entertainment media that is consistent with their existing attitudes. Can we overcome this? Future research could reveal the types of characters and stories that can attract and retain the audiences that need to be reached, as well as show if and how positive effects can persist in the long term.
Thanks, Stuart, for that perspective. I'm really excited about this next panel. So what insights do social scientists and bridge building practitioners offer for how to create depolarizing stories? I'd like to invite practitioner, expert, and executive director of Resetting the Table, Melissa Weintraub, and social scientist and professor of psychology and education at Columbia University, Dr. Peter T. Coleman, to answer a few questions. So first, let's start with Melissa. Melissa, welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks,
would love for you to just start and share with us the focus of your work.
Sure. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm the founding co-executive director of Resetting the Table. We equip societal norm shapers from journalists to clergy with tools to transform entrenched political divisions. I personally spent 25 years working on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the day after the 2016 election, I had a wake-up call, like so many others, that the US was potentially degenerating into our own intractable conflict and even violent confrontation. And our work at Resetting the Table, or RTT, focuses on training leaders, including storytellers, and how to open up courageous and important communication across ideological differences and divides.
That's so interesting. I'm curious, given all this work that you've done as a practitioner, how do you see entertainment specifically contributing to overcoming toxic polarization?
That is a great question. That's what we're here to investigate and discuss together. So I think as my entry point, I want to share an experience in which the idea that entertainment could be a tremendous vehicle for depolarization first germinated for us at Resetting the Table. So in 2017, we conducted a listening campaign of hundreds of interviews in rural Wisconsin and Iowa, in the area that had the greatest concentration of counties that flipped Obama to Trump in the 2016 election. And we spoke to fishermen, dairy farmers, manure consultants, rural school teachers, veterans, and every persuasion of pastor and priest. And we listened with the sole objective of excavating people's core motivations and concerns. We brought with us 36 facilitators, many of them coming from deep blue enclaves like Brooklyn and LA. And again, many noted how rich and complex this rural flyover world was than what they'd expected. Many said things like, I've spent my whole life reacting to stereotypes of the perspectives I'm hearing, rather than to the perspectives themselves, let alone to the human beings behind them. They'd essentially been initiated into what Peter, who we'll hear from momentarily, calls contradictory complexity, which I'll summarize as, I've never thought about that. Maybe I've encountered these people all wrong. So we began to think about how film and TV could be great tools for proxy journeys, for doing for various audiences what immersion in rural Wisconsin did for our coastal facilitators, getting us all out of our like-minded enclaves to cross psychic distances of background and viewpoint in a time that we've grown so ideologically siloed that many find their counterparts unintelligible, if not far worse. Storytellers could be our societal translators for the different ideological, racial, regional, and socioeconomic voices and identities of American life, and initiate us into the possibility that we may have gotten our counterparts all wrong.
I love that so much. And I'm curious if you can get maybe a little more specific, like, are there any principles and techniques from, this bridging work that might be useful for someone who's like a content creator?
Yeah, so one thing I want to say up front around that question, there can be a common misperception that bridging is about defanging or tiptoeing around our differences in favor of some Pollyannish unity or morally compromised middle ground. And I want to be clear that if conflict is the heartbeat of good drama, that our goal as practitioners, and the goal that I'd suggest for storytellers, is healthy conflict, where characters confront each other and their differences head on, but they still do so productively in ways that can lead to fresh thinking, relational healing, and can enact the transformative potential of human encounter, all fertile ground for a hero's journey. Beyond that, I'll share a few ideas and tips. Scholars and practitioners of conflict intervention have long observed that when we're confronted with conflict or threat, we tend to get more self-absorbed and more rigid. We can get impervious to the experience of the person sitting right before us, even when we love that person very much. We become much less receptive and flexible than the people that we are when we're most at ease. So polarized social conflict reproduces these tendencies writ large. We get echo chambers, a collective corollary of self-absorption. We get confirmation bias on steroids, a collective corollary of rigidity. The riddle of our work, the million-dollar question, is how in the face of volatile differences do we transform that self-absorption into mutual recognition and rigidity into mutual receptivity, so that people who may enter a room fearful, estranged, escalated, reactive, can genuinely see each other and take each other in. So there's of course not only one answer to this riddle. I'll touch on one or two techniques that are core building blocks for producing these shifts and that can be reproduced in stories that entertain and move us and could produce greater recognition and receptivity across lines of difference on a mass scale. So the first technique, we work to ensure that all parties feel seen as they see themselves and as they wish to be seen, what we call a bullseye reflection. So a bullseye reflection reconstructs someone's lens on their own terms until they'd lean forward in their chairs and they'd say, bullseye, that's me, exactly. There's a wealth of research that shows that the more people feel that who they are is truly seen by others, the more they feel a sense of ease and connection and generosity, even in the face of strongly held differences and disagreement. So there's so many applications of this practice to storytelling, whether scripted or unscripted. Among them, we need to build characters that give bullseye reflections to disparate lenses until those who would identify with them would say, bullseye, you get it, you see me, that's me. And we think better integrating this skill into character development would create more riveting, authentic, multidimensional characters, and also help divergent audiences take in ideas and information and human beings that they might otherwise be quick to reject or dismiss. So I'll stop with that technique for the sake of time, but I'll just say that bullseye reflections are among the most powerful of a whole series of mediation techniques that shift rigidity into receptivity and can be integrated into storytelling so that characters and vicariously viewers could better hold the cognitive dissonance of taking in others' perspectives without letting go of their own.
That's so powerful, Melissa. And it's so true. I think we all really want to be seen as we see ourselves. And especially in the political climate, we seldom have the opportunity to feel seen that way. Do you have any like call to actions for this group that maybe could invite us to consider, that, some call to actions that we might consider moving forward?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I'll name is that these practices are deceptively simple, but as you've kind of alluded to, they can be swimming upstream when many of us are operating in relative silos, when we're often unaware that we're projecting all kinds of things onto our ideological counterparts unwittingly. And through media, we're often encountering the worst versions of others' thinking rather than an accurate, let alone a generous portrayal of who they really are and what they care about. So I think it's worth acknowledging that the entertainment industry, though certainly not politically homogeneous, on the whole leans progressive.
Definitely.
And my first call to action would be to chase after the best, the most eloquent, the most out-of-the-box voices that sit on other sides of America's divides until we can viscerally register, this is what it would be like to be that person. If we lean progressive to really try to get, this is what it would be like to be a pro-life evangelical pastor's wife who tearfully voted Democrat for the first time, or an auto mechanic who champions reproductive and LGBTQ rights as well as gun rights and who voted for Bernie and then for Trump. This is what it would be like to be that person. So conservatives don't end up appearing in our stories as at best lovable bigots. And conservatives certainly are not the only group that's been distorted or stereotyped. There has been much needed attention to issues of representation when it comes to race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. To be able to give bullseye reflections to the many streams and identities of American life, we may need to do a self-inventory of where we need to build real relationship and understanding across divides ourselves that we don't yet have, and who we need to invite into our writers' rooms to push us on our own blind spots around representation. So I'll just close with one more call to action that I want to say that the techniques that I've touched on can be practiced and can be learned. And we're going to be giving a workshop in partnership with the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health in December that's specifically designed for entertainment industry professionals that want to transform toxic conflict. We're going to practice bullseye reflections and other related skills with live coaching. And we're going to explore in more depth how these techniques can be integrated into storytelling. So we hope some of you will consider joining us and that you'll be inspired by all the conversation today to tell stories that capture disparate groups of Americans as they see themselves and wish to be seen, the stories that we so desperately need.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Yeah, keep an eye out for that workshop. I'm so fascinated and I would love to attend myself. Thanks, Melissa. Would love to transition it over to you, Peter. Do you mind sharing just briefly the focus of your work?
Yeah, so I'm a professor at Columbia. I do research principally, although I'm a trained mediator and a consultant in different conflict settings. And I work in kind of two buckets. One is I, for a long time, studied long-term, deeply divided societies that get stuck in intractable conflicts and the conditions under which they come out of it. So that's been an important perspective. But we also have a major study on sustainably peaceful societies. So these are societies that at some point in their history came out of oftentimes civil war or worse, and intentionally pivoted. And what are the norms and conditions and media and the kinds of language that they use? So we study so those two worlds. I study conflicts that get stuck in protracted dynamics and societies that get stuck in peaceful, virtuous cycles.
Wow. Okay, cool. Because I think there's so many crossovers between the social sciences and entertainment and toxic polarization, obviously. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about, currently, how do social scientists think about the problem of toxic polarization?
Yeah, so there's the good news is that there are decades and tomes of research on intergroup conflict and when it goes bad and how it gets stuck and how to help. So there is lots of research. That's the good news. The problem is that social scientists tend to study problems like this, a dynamic I call toxic polarization, because it's a multi-decade trajectory of increasing enmity and hate. We tend to study these things in pieces. So we study people's attitudes or their beliefs or particular behaviors or the media that they watch or the internet platforms that they interact in. So we tend to zero in and try to identify the essence of this problem. And that's a problem, because this pattern, which is a deeply embedded cultural pattern that, again, started probably in the late 1960s and continues to escalate today, is not based on any one thing. It's not based on moral differences. It's not based on, attitude differences. It's not based on the media that you watched. It's based on how those different pieces of the puzzle start to align and feed each other. And then they really create traps like addiction or like living in a family with a violent spouse that is immensely difficult to see our way out of, right? And I think that's really important to understand for this audience, because, we in the West, we like clear solutions, simple solutions. We like quick fixes. So we go there, and that's what scientists attempt to do. And so we've learned a ton from finding the pieces. But what we don't understand enough and what we don't communicate to the public enough is how this is a big problem. This is not, any 1, 2, 3 things. It's layers of problems that are working in concert to pull us against each other. So even when we say enough, we're fed up, we want to do something else, it's very difficult. We get sucked back in by our family and our friends and our communities and who we don't talk to. It's a big problem, and that's an important thing to communicate, I think, to Americans.
Yeah. I totally agree, and not to segment this question too much, because, like you said, it's all interconnected in so many ways. But I'm curious, specifically, we're here because we're interested in entertainment, and wondering, how do you think entertainment can play a role in transforming some of these partisan conflicts that we've seen unfold?
Yeah, no, great question. So I would offer 3, categories of work. One is that the entertainment industry could, do the best they can to stop making things worse. In other words, they could start to reflect critically on the business models, on the ways of approaching, and the kinds of stories that they're telling that contribute to polarization. For example, there was a study recently that looked at the depiction of politicians in media. And politicians are the villains, they're despots, they're enemies, and so it's always the independent fighter that comes against them and undoes them. Well, one of the problems in this dynamic is that our trust in institutions like the media, but our trust in institutions like government, have been on a decline for decades, and entertainment contributes to that. And again, it might be low-hanging fruit, it might be a popular tune to play in a movie, but it contributes to that. So there are groups in journalism, for example. There's a group called Solutions Journalism that looks critically at how reporters and the business model of reporting contributes to polarization, and what might be some of the ways to critically examine that and then pivot and still be able to do reporting, but maybe how you do it, why you do it, what you're focused on, who's in the conversation, and the nuance with which you tell stories could change and do less harm, and maybe even start to promote. So that's one thing I would say is a serious attempt to self-reflect on the structures, the incentive structures that are driving so much of entertainment that contribute to our polarization. Second thing I would say is I do think it's helpful to help Americans understand the nature of this problem. It's not Donald Trump alone. It's not, Rudy Giuliani. It's not Joe Biden. It's not this. It is a complicated system. And so trying to find ways to explain that to people so that we don't get misled and seduced into thinking, okay, well, all I need to do is kind of reach out to my neighbor and talk to my neighbor who, has a different political view, because most of the time, that's a great idea. When you have true believers, true Trump supporters, anti-Trump zealots, then having people just get together and talk is unethical, and it's a mistake, and it often blows up. Pew found that 70% of Americans that try to talk to the other side leave feeling more frustrated, and that they have less in common than they thought. So we have to be careful about how we talk about the solutions, and we have to help people understand the nature of this problem, which, as I say, is a kind of multi-layered, complex set of problems that are feeding each other. And then the third way, I think, is really to do what they can to, show a way out, to tell stories that provide kind of hopeful journeys of people moving from hate to going through experiences that move them out of that. And one of the pitches I'll make on this is, I was fortunate to work with a guy who had been a skinhead and had done horrible things, and then had these kind of set of, in some ways, really small incidents that tripped him and triggered him to move in a totally different trajectory. And so it's important to, again, tell those stories, show that we all can move out of these times where we're triggered by, the fact that this tennis player is an anti-vaxxer, and it infuriates me, that we can move out of that, and that there are ways to do that. But one of the things that the entertainment media can do, and Shamal talked about Search for Common Ground's use of media, and this is one of the models that they use, which is that when they are trying to show the kind of hero's journey from contempt to compassion, they oftentimes will show it going through an existing support mechanism, support group, organization that helps them do that. So with addiction, they show that with AA. Right, a sponsor reaches out, somebody goes to AA, and that starts to transform their life. The good news in America is that if you go to the Bridging Divides Initiative website, which is out of Princeton University, I have nothing to do with it. They've documented in America, there's an interactive map, and if you go to it, you can go to your county, you can go to your town, and it tells you who the bridge building organizations are that exist there. And so if the stories show people using that resource or going to a community group, this is compelling stuff, right? Because it's life-changing dynamics and transformational dynamics. But what the research says is if you actually show the hero, not just of their own volition change, but really go and get the support that is needed to change, then utilization levels of those programs skyrocket. And that's what we need to do. We need to have the media help direct people to the kinds of support that they need to do these conversations and to change their lives effectively under this, in the context of this difficult problem.
Wow, that's so interesting. Could you drop that resource into the chat after you're done? Because I think that's so good to know about. Like we have to do this in community, right? And we can't think of it as a process we go through by ourselves. And I really, really appreciate you sharing that. Last question for you, Peter, and we have to wrap up soon, but what's your big story idea? Like, sky's the limit. You've got the expertise, you've been working on this. Like, if you had the best writers in the industry at your disposal, is there anything you would tell them? Anything you would have them do?
Yeah, there's probably a lot that I tell them, but if I guess I'd essentialize it. So one of the things I've been impressed by is there's a television show that Nat Geo puts out called Dr. Pol. And Dr. Pol is a vet. And I don't know where he's from, but he's not American, but he's an older man. And he's a vet I think it's in rural Michigan. And what's kind of fascinating about him is that it's a reality kind of show, right? But he's in rural Michigan. And it's not a show that talks about politics. It's a place that talks about pets and animals and farm animals and the challenges that people are having and their love for these animals, but also their deep appreciation for him who comes in and does that kind of work. I think to me, I've watched that show because it teaches me about a part of America that I these days don't have much contact with. And it moves me in ways because they love their family and they love their animals, and they're crying because their pig is sick, you know? So there's something profound about that. And what I would love to see is a version of that that does identify, celebrate, and recognize bridge builders. I think bridge builders, by definition, most bridge builders do confidential work below the radar because, you know, it can draw a lot of negative attention and because it's usually confidential processes. But these are quiet heroes that are doing work, again, across the country. There are some, as I said, between 7,000 and 10,000 groups and organizations across America that are doing this work, and Americans don't know about it. So somehow recognizing, celebrating those actors, I think could be a game changer in awakening Americans to the value and the power of that kind of work.
Amazing. Peter, thank you so much for your time. Melissa, thank you so much for your time. Now I'd like to pass it on to my good friend, S.J. Murray.
Hi, Romaine. Thanks. It's good to see you. It's been too long. I think it's been pre-pandemic.
You too. Good to see you.
So, so hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I am excited to have a little chat with our panelists this afternoon about that secret sauce, how scripted television and film bridge divides. Now, I'm not going to go through everybody's bios. You can look them up. They don't really need any introduction, but it's good to flag. So in order to flag some of my favorite work that they've done, I'm just going to mention one show, which happened to be my favorite show that they've worked on at one point in their career. So we've got Dave Kaplan with us from the Connors, Felicia Henderson, who may be here already or joining us en route, and who can forget Gossip Girl, Rob Long, Cheers, another classic, and Dean Batali. I'm so happy you're here because Buffy was like, the first 2 seasons of Buffy defined a lot of my life. So I'm excited to have you here as well. We're going to jump right in. And I think that Anne had a video that she wanted to show at the beginning of the presentation. Or perhaps not, which is totally fine too. I mean, I can give you all a video if you like, just sort of kidding. I am in Animal Kingdom right now, if you're wondering what this background is. So if you desire to see the tigers, I can introduce you to them later. So Dave, let's start with you. And Felicia, jump in on this as well if you've already joined us.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Felicia.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So the first question goes out to both you and Dave then. I'd like you both to answer this one. You know, given the time we live in and the sense of what you have of where we're at as a country, I'd love you to talk a little bit from a creative side and point of view of what storytelling can accomplish and some of our goals for storytelling at the moment.
Ooh, Dave, that sounds like a good one for you.
Okay, well, I'll jump in there, Felicia. Thank you. Well, you know, look, it's no secret where our country's at the moment. You know, I think there are great writers and theorists and social scientists that talk about having a shared narrative for what a society or a country is. And because we're so divided, not only, you know, as a people and not in an unrelated note, because we're divided in our media, we're in danger of not having a shared narrative of what our country is anymore. And that's not to say it should be the old narrative. The narrative needs to be updated and needs to be updated for inclusion and a whole lot of other things that require it to be a more modern take on what the United States is. But if we have parts of the country that don't have the same idea for a country in mind, that's where you end up having a country that's so divided, you end up in, it sounds hyperbolic, but you end up in a civil war. And that's, I think, the secret fear that we're all harboring because we're headed in that kind of direction. So I think storytelling from both a social science standpoint of what social, you know, what can we create with storytelling, and also just from a shared spaces perspective, I think storytelling is as important as it ever was, and maybe more important for a variety of reasons we can touch on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Felicia, would you like to speak into this as well?
Sure. I mean, I'll be brief. I think I would add, the idea of a shared narrative, starting from there, is why this is first. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Felicia, how are you?
Hi, Rob is one of my former teachers at UCLA, in addition to being accomplished in all the other ways. He's one of the reasons that I was like, I believe I can do this. But I think that that is, sort of why it's so complicated of where we want to go. I'm always a person who comes from a place of hope, no matter what I see in front of me. But I think that it is so tricky to come to a place of a shared narrative, because we are always in a place where we got to go, who's still creating that narrative, who's writing that narrative, who is in part of the process of rewriting the narrative, and how do we get to a place, really, I think, where and this is why it's so tricky, where that narrative embraces difference more than it strives to say, what do we all have in common, as opposed to what is it that's different about us that we can accept and then write that into the definition of who we are.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I often think that we have to be careful about the language we use about this too, right? Because maybe we all actually do start from a place of what we have in common, until we start talking about how we can't have a shared narrative. I was watching some little kids at Disney World today, and they certainly all are participating together in a shared narrative that they have when they're dancing in front of the music or participating in anything. It's really cultural narratives that tell us our differences and point them out. So I'd love to hear you and Dave talk also a little bit about, you both have PhDs and have done research on this prior to really delving into adapting that to your creative work. Can you tell us, both of you, a little bit about your research and how that impacts the work that you do now?
Dave, I'll go, Dave.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so, I was in the business before I, pursued an academic life. So it was really as a result of hearing others, scholars or young scholars and those striving to be scholars talk about my creative work that inspired me to, want to find out more, to, study, I always felt a responsibility, in the media I create, and regardless of what I want to say, I've never been one of those who thought, well, I'm just an artist and there's no responsibility with that. I'm just sharing my art. I never believed that. I believe I have a responsibility, but at the same time, so I was very interested in the disconnect with some people I heard talk about my creative work between what I was putting out there and what they were receiving, the message that I was giving versus what they were receiving. I was like, this is interesting stuff. And by the same token, though, I was also, having at that point, probably when I first went back to school, maybe been, in a writer for maybe 15 years. So I was also, of course, had seen patterns. I was interested in, I started at a time where being often the only one or one of a couple of Blacks on Black themed shows, and only having ever worked for one Black showrunner when I started, in the first several years of my career. So I was also interested in race, class, and gender and how they play out in the writer's room and how that then influences story. So the personal ideas and views in the room, actually, how do they end up on screen? Having seen what I'd seen and started when I started at a time where there were, very few women showrunners and very few Black showrunners, and having started on Black family comedies, and yet never having had a Black boss as a young writer. All of that was always interesting to me. So my research is about race, class, and gender in the writer's room, looking at sort of the the rituals behind the curtain, if you will, and how they play out and how they influence story. I've also do a lot of work around contracts, and starting with the 2007 writer's strike, and how, what has value to those striking and what doesn't, and how studios, those who pay us, decide to monetize things that probably shouldn't be monetized, but they do. For example, but you're on a J.J. Abrams show, so we should be able to pay you less because look at the, look at this highbrow show you're on. That's part of your payment in a way, but of course, like you can't take that to the bank and go, I'm going to pay my mortgage with my highbrow credit this month. So I look at those kinds of things as well.
What my research was and continues to be on changes to audience empathy upon watching fictional characters. And there was a tremendous amount of literature in the canon about short stories and how that changes a reader's empathy. And I was sort of shocked to learn that there was very little to no research on how TV shows and movies can change audience empathy. Mm-hmm. So I was shocked. I had that moment of feeling, well, if nobody's done this, there must be some reason, and maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. But it just so happened that nobody quite got around to updating that research into the visual mediums that we're all consuming multiple hours a day. So that really informed my work, of course, because when I started to realize what a powerful tool storytelling is to open up the minds of an audience, I started to use the things that I had read from other great researchers and things that I had discovered to try to create characters that were more open to seeing change, that were more open to seeing different viewpoints from other characters. So one of the really concrete ways that it changed my writing was I wanted to create moments and characters where there were things that were discussed and contemplated, and we didn't have to reach any conclusion. We didn't have to preach, and we didn't have to try to persuade. And in fact, what the research says is the minute you try to persuade people with a story to do one thing or another, to reach across the aisle, you try to persuade them to be open-minded, they're out the door. So they call that, reactivity or counter-arguing. And any attempt to persuade is felt like a threat to somebody's psychological freedom, and they check out. So yeah, the reactance, somebody was just talking about that. Yeah. So it's really interesting. So we as writers have to figure out, content creators, how to model certain interesting behaviors without being preachy about it, in a way that people that are in these shows can kind of see, hey, somebody else is doing it a different way. I might be able to model that behavior.
I love that. Yeah, it's like the old principle of having a conversation. You don't actually always go into it to change somebody else's mind. You also go in to be changed. It's also okay for the Socratic dialogue to continue. It doesn't have to be quietly wrapped up before we turn the TV off. So on that note, I would love all of you, maybe we'll start this time with Rob and Dean in whatever order you want to answer. I'd love all of you to share a little bit personally, a show that you watched that inspired you and maybe opened you up to a change of opinion or really caught your attention in terms of techniques it was using and that has inspired you.
Well, first of all, I have a 3-year degree from a liberal arts college, so I don't know what these PhDs are talking about. There's two things. I want to pick up on something they said. I think that when I was younger, the show Roots affected me in a really interesting way because it was like a look into a world that I didn't know, a culture and people that I didn't know at the time. The challenge that I have in answering that question is I rarely see people like myself on TV because I am a Christian. And when we talk about diversity and kind of the conversation was just going on, I don't mean to move the question completely, is But Felicia has talked about her experiences as the only Black person in the room. I'm generally the only Christian in the room. And it has really affected, my own psyche and also the storytelling that happens. So when I talk, when I hear a question like, well, what kind of things have changed you? And I look around to try to see positive portrayal of Christians on TV, like in the recent Unbelievable or The Americans or Justified. That's kind of what I'm looking for, is really more to see myself so that other people's visions of me are changed rather than what shows I saw that changed my vision of others. So it's kind of a two-part.
I love that. Like, I'm going to give you a shout out there too and say I share your faith, Dean. And that's something I think about too, like the watering down that I was hearing people talk about earlier. Let's say creating stereotypes, whether they are cultural or racial or gender-based or religion-based, really contributes to shaping the way we look at those groups and their views and culture. And if we are not careful and ethical about those kinds of portrayals, it can create a lot of misconceptions, even some that, who knows, maybe we're sharing in the chat at the moment. It's possible.
Well, and the difference is,
think about where ideas come from. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious because of Rob, Rob's pretty vocal in his political views. I'm curious if he's ever been brought in. Like, I've never met with an executive who says, hey, I hear you're a person of faith. We'd like to bring in that audience of people of faith. How do we do that?
Right.
I've never had that meeting. So Rob, how about you?
No, I've never, I don't think I've had that. No one's ever said that to me, but I think they've thought that. Look, I guess I take it from a slightly different perspective. I think that what makes great stories isn't what the things that unite us. And not things that divide us. It's the specifics of the characters. And the more specific you are to the voice, the more specific you are to their lives and to what they want, weirdly, the more relatable it is, because people don't relate to generals, they relate to specifics. But the problem is, if in the writer's room, everybody looks the same, votes the same, drives the same Prius, and thinks the same things, and lives in the 310 area code, it's hard. It's just natural to have to. I don't know. I've been in a million meetings where someone will start by saying, I heard this great story on This American Life, this NPR show. It's very specific. I love the show, but it's a very specific way of looking at the world, and everyone shares that perspective. So it's really hard. And if I'm just talking about the business now. In the business, if you're going for a 20 share, which is how a lot of us here started, you can't be that granular. But if you're going for a 4 share, a 3 share, a 1 million people is all you need. Well, why do you need to appeal to people of faith? Why do you need to appeal to anybody who's not like you? You can find 1 million people to watch your show. The problem really is, the example here is how much money you can make in the media business running a news channel that appeals to a very small slice of America. You can make a whole lot of money. And I don't just mean Fox News. I mean CNN too. And I started trying to get a big audience. That's what broadcast TV was supposed to be. A big audience. You had to be big. So you had a lot of voices in there, a lot of characters in there, and people disagreed, and it had to reflect kind of the way we live our lives. And I think as the business got smaller and the rooms got smaller and our perspective got smaller, so do the stories we tell. They just get smaller. And I think there's a feeling in America, in the audience anyway, that's kind of dissatisfaction with that, or at least for me, it's dissatisfaction with that. And I think we'd be better if we sort of recognize that, it's a great moment. So, to just emotionally for me to be here and to see Felicia here, it's fantastic, because I don't know, Felicia, I don't want to actually put a number on the number of years, but it's been a long time. And, she was a student, and now she's like by the way, I'm available, Felicia, if you're running the show. It's like that is that means something good is happening, I guess. But I feel like our job is to tell the truth. And
why isn't broadcast television and cable television going after a more socially and politically and religiously diverse audience?
Because they don't know anybody like that. They don't know anybody. I don't mean that as a criticism. They simply don't know anybody. They don't know who those people are.
Yeah, but I also like to say, Robin, thank you for telling me you were available.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to say, Dean, I don't know that I agree with you, because I think when I wanted to see, like, after my first visit to a mega church in the South, which blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. Like, there are 10,000 people in here. I went with a friend who was a celebrity, who then sat in the VIP seating, and everybody was dressed, all the ushers were dressed in black with earphones going, "Hey, I've got so-and-so coming to you on." I'm like, whoa, it blew my mind. And so then I set out a whole summer traveling the country to visit mega churches because it was just so wild to me. And then I wrote a piece about it because it wasn't on television. And I did not sell that, but it got me a whole bunch of meetings, and then other people, asking me to write about different angles of religion, mostly though, so people know that I can do that. People know that I'm interested in that. There are several shows on in those kinds of areas, and I know a lot of them that have been developed. And I was raised in a house where those shows were, everything from Touched by an Angel to Highway to Heaven was like, my mom was like, "Sit down, we're watching television. That something finally good is on TV."
They're not on anymore.
So but I disagree with that. I think because in the cable world, you know what I mean? I can tell you 2 or 3 that are on in places like OWN and places.
That's correct. They're black. That's correct. They're black. They're shows about black Christians. I feel Hollywood has understood and accepted black Christianity and don't understand white Christianity. And my black writer friends who are Christian feel the same thing. It's just, yes,
I
those
just
shows
say
are
that
on.
It's not my experiences. I'm not only being asked to speak about the black Christian experience. I think I think I don't know if it comes from your agents knowing that I want to write this, because those kind of projects come to me often.
Look, I've written a book on television religion. People Google me and know kind of my faith. I've been denied meetings because of my faith, because of people in the room who've told me. But I'm just saying that I don't see 16-year-old Christian girls on TV. I think there's a segregation in religion on TV. Other than the Reagans on Blue Bloods, you don't see white families pray. I don't want to make it a racial divide. I'm just saying that from the executives I've talked to, there's kind of an understanding of Catholicism and Christianity, Christianity in the black world. They don't understand white evangelical Christianity, if you put it that way, which is 40% of America. And they don't they don't say, how do we get this audience? Because I think Rob's right. They don't know them. And I actually think they don't want them. I think that they don't want to make shows for Trump-loving Bible-thumping Christians.
Here's the puzzling thing about that, I'll say, Dean and Rob. When we rebooted the Roseanne show, right? And we said, well, what we're going to do here is she was very vocal about being a Trump supporter. And we said, well, let's include that and let's not denigrate it. Let's find out what's behind her political views, and let's find out what's behind the political views on the other side. Because if you go deep enough, it ends up becoming an emotional need for wanting your children to do better, wanting to be able to get a job, whatever those things are behind the outward stance are the things that are most interesting to write about, of course. And so, to your point, Rob, and to your point, Dean, the specificity is what made it interesting. So when we did that, and by the way, she said grace around our table, and we said, let's be specific about who this person is, and let's get to the meat of why they feel the way they feel and what their fears and their hopes are. Now, we are not geniuses, and we had no idea what was going to happen, but we had 25 million people view a network show. Blew everybody's mind. We thought, how could that happen? We were expecting 5 million people, and we got 25 when it was all said and done. It was like football numbers, right? But that just spoke to the idea that there are people out there that are just desperate to show a respectful representation of whatever their thing is. Now, why that doesn't kick in and say to everybody, let's be more respectful and inclusive in our portrayal of characters, and let's not rush to make judgments about these characters. Let's let them be. I don't know. You would think that success would leave some kind of trail, wouldn't it?
Well, I think there are two answers to that, right? The one answer is that it's risky and people are uncomfortable, and people,
Sure.
especially rich people, and everybody who makes these decisions are rich people. They're uncomfortable with the issues of faith, they're uncomfortable with issues of race, they're uncomfortable with issues of class, they're uncomfortable, so they'd really rather talk about smaller things. Unfortunately for them, the funniest stuff, I mean, I do comedy, the funniest things in the world are those three topics. Those are funny things. They're areas of great comedy. The second reason, I think, is that we now have a very, very alarmed culture in which if a character espouses views that character would espouse in real life, we've now crossed the line, and people could say, well, you're not allowed to say that on TV, even if that character would say that. So it's hard to depict truth. And so you end up just depicting, trivialities.
I share your concerns about that too.
Yeah. And so it feels to me like the answer is really how funny and interesting and diverse is the writer's room? And if the writer's room is funny and interesting and diverse and free, you're going to get a funny, interesting, and diverse TV show. And I mean, I don't think about characters representing things. I don't think about them, their psychology. I mean, it was interesting to listen to the research in the panel before, but I've never in my life thought of a story that way. And I hope I never do, because it doesn't seem like it's going to actually be a terribly interesting story. But you do think about, like, what would a person really say? Like, what would they really think? And then if you love your characters, even the ones who are jerks, even the ones who are evil, even the ones that you really don't. I mean, Norman Lear created All in the Family, and Archie Bunker was supposed to be the bad guy. And actually, it turns out if you write a blue collar guy who's a bigot and loud, but he fought in World War II, and he takes down 2 jobs so he could pay for his, do nothing son-in-law to want to go to take classes at college. Americans mostly think, oh, I think the hero is the loudmouth jerk, even though he's a loudmouth jerk. You discover that we actually, the more specific we are, the more look, I guess what I mean is it's really hard to hate up close. And the more you put the characters up close, the more interesting, funny, and I think ultimately beneficial the show is.
Rob, I think that's, going back, SJ, to our very beginning, I think you're talking exactly about what I meant when I said celebrating difference. Because it sort of is a thing that I think people say, quickly and without much thought, to just, say, let's start with what we all have in common. Of course, we have a lot in common. I'm not saying that we don't, but I think that there is so much value in the specifics, in the specificity, and how interesting people become in things that aren't like them when they get to see it up close, and that we then don't have to, like, let's all fit into this particular mold, but to embrace how we are different, I think is also a way for us to be able to come together when, again, being able to learn about someone who is different than you. And so now I'm like, oh, I'm interested in that because I didn't know that. And I've learned something. And now that thing isn't scary because I know it and I understand it. So I often think about that being the way to what we have in common can be a respect for how we are different, but we got to learn how we are different.
Yes.
I would just say, could I just say for what
go for
Dean
it,
said,
and then I'm going to time you all out.
Then get me out. Yeah, what Dean said is, I think that's true. I mean, I know in my experience, when I tell people, I live in New York City. I'm actually in Mississippi right now, but I live in New York City mostly. When I tell people, oh, I go to church on Sunday, the fancy pantsy people that I hang out with, who are, the right people, and they read the New York Times, the New Yorker, and they're like, listen to NPR. They look at me like, what? Really? What? That is one problem that I think is one area that we in writing popular culture, writing for television, need to sort of address, is that this is a big, big country, and there's a lot of really great people in it who have incredibly different experiences, and that's what we should be writing about. I mean, that's what we're here for. And sometimes I feel like Dean, I think we're yelling into the wind. Like nobody's like that is not shared by the people who are putting TV shows on. And my argument isn't that they should be losing money. My argument is they make more money if they tell all the stories and actually reflect the American workplace, the American family, the American city, the American suburb, which is a big, loud, cacophonous place. The neighborhood in Americas are people disagree and manage to live together in relative peace. I think the biggest polarization is not in America. It's in newsrooms and it's in entertainment executive offices. That's where there's polarization because they simply don't know anybody who disagrees with them or lives a different life, whereas normal people do.
Yeah, and maybe, and maybe even in our own little filter bubbles too. No, I really appreciate the kind of civil discourse that you all are modeling here today with diverse views and opinions. This is something we need to do more of, I think, across all kinds of topics and subjects in America. As a closeout for us all to step away from this conversation, I would love to hear from each of you what gives you hope and how you think storytellers can take a simple step towards contributing to a solution.
Okay, I'll jump in. Well, I think what we're doing today gives me hope. But I also think for content creators to understand the power of what they're doing is a hopeful thing. Nobody goes to a half-hour television comedy or a CSI or what have you to learn anything. They just don't. But if we make small little changes in our writing to show respectful disagreement between people that are from disparate places and disparate viewpoints, that's a very powerful thing because that becomes part of the norm of values and behaviors that people who are watching 5 hours of television a day, that becomes a normal thing to them. And when that becomes normal, now I'm not talking about the wild extremes on the left or the right, but we're really talking about the people in the middle that have been pushed to the extremes by media, by siloing, by algorithmic feeds on social media, these kinds of things. If they see that the norm is that people can disagree in some sort of healthy way, that's exceedingly powerful. The fact that we have the power to do that, if we can sort of get everybody, up to speed on why that's important, that's a hopeful thing.
Felicia, you want to follow up to that? Thank you.
Oh gosh, that was so good. And thank you, Dave. I was just, the amen corner over here. Thank you for that. I think that it's interesting. I find probably maybe the most interesting point in my career right now, in that I just finished producing a show in Atlanta and a place that, I went to grad school in Georgia and, my parents are from the South, so I had sort of quite a lot of love for the South. But this was my first time, and I was there for 6 months, sort of post the Trump years, and it was the first time that I found that God, this is in my real life, the idea that people who I disagree with, we can't even share space anymore. So that's, what I'm fighting now is that, again, as a hopeful person in general, I'm trying to find that space again where people who I'm different than, that didn't ever used to be a problem. So I find it more challenging, Dave, for me now than ever before because of the polarization. And I don't think it's just in the media, because places like that where you're interacting with crews and just everyday, folks, it's different than I've ever seen it. And how still nasty people are to each other, and how shocked I was recently to have a blowout on the highway in the middle of nowhere, in northern Nevada on my way to Idaho. And for a guy to just pull over immediately and say, oh my goodness, like, oh God, I forgot that's how people could be that nice, like went out of his way and stayed with me and made sure I got up and got a new tire and called ahead, did all this stuff. But I was sad that I was so surprised to get that help, from someone who even made sure that he told me that he voted for Trump. He wanted me to know that, as he was helping me. So I thought that's interesting. But I thought, oh yeah, I used to feel this was a place where you could have differences of opinion, this country, and still find a common space. So, I mean, my hope is that I'm a hopeful person, and so I have to believe that I won't feel like this forever. In my work, I am hopefully always trying to present different kinds of people from every walks of life. I think, even at myself, I'm, sort of a conservative liberal. So I hope that, somehow I'm sprinkling all those kind of, disparate kinds of characters in what I'm doing. I think, yes, I think that, and I do get hopeful about, the new generation of content creators, the ones in my classrooms, the ones coming up, the, lower level writers. And I find a lot of hope in them because, it's impossible to just think that nothing's going to be better or change when you see the change coming, and then I feel I find a lot of hope in that. But I also am just, if I'm honest, I'm for the first time in my career and in my life I'm struggling to be hopeful.
Thank
I'll
you
go
for sharing. Go for it.
quickly, and then Rob can finish because he's more articulate. I'm not an optimist. Tolkien said, "By birth, I'm a pessimist, but by conviction, an optimist." So I do try to believe, hopefully, in terms of Hollywood's diversity, in terms of worldview and social and life experience diversity, I am optimistic that now that we've kind of finally trying to catch up racial and gender diversity, making big efforts, I feel that there might be a lagging indicator that they might then look around the room and go, oh, we need people with different political views and different social views and different religious views, so we have more of an example of America. I don't know how that happens. I think it's a long haul. I think you need schools and organizations to fund and patronize people with different viewpoints, get them into executive offices, get them into writers' rooms. I don't know how other underrepresented groups have done that aggressively, because to say that, right of center and religious people are an underrepresented group in this industry, how do you make that happen in the long term? I also do want to give a shout out to Dave's show, because they did a really interesting story arc with Darlene, kind of searching for religion with Jason Alexander as a pastor. So I want other people of faith to watch the show because of that. But I am hopeful that maybe diversity that we're looking at now might in a few years lead to, hey, how do we find some other people and bring them into the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think I'm glad you're shouting out for the Connors, because the Connors is an American real American family, and it's funny, just kind of like it's supposed to be, just kind of like the American family is.
I love you guys. Come right with us.
As I said, I'm available. I don't know what I'm just sitting here. But look, I think that my job, I shouldn't say my job, I write comedy. My job is to find the funny stuff in what's really happening and what you're really thinking. And so I have to tell the truth. And that's, if I do that, then I know it's going to be funny, because the world is funny. Life is funny. And I'm probably going to piss some people off, because there are a bunch of people who just have no sense of humor. But that's the job. And I think that if we just did that and just said, okay, is this real? Does this really happen? This is a real, I don't mean realistic. I just mean it seem real. I think we'd be already on third base. But we steering into our differences and to what makes us different from each other is the goal, is my goal, is my solution. It's not steering away from it, steering into it, because I think that stuff is what's the most fascinating. And I think that's the stuff that brings the audience back. And that's the stuff that people find funny. That's the stuff that I think, if we're actually looking to sort of bridge divides, that's what's going to do it. Not pretending that, not creating a sanitized and fully committee reviewed depiction of the world, but instead getting a lot of voices in a room and making characters on TV sound like the voices that we hear all day in our lives. Yeah. And that'd be my goal. That's my answer to that. And I think I'm optimistic. Despair is a sin to me, so I'm optimistic.
I'm optimistic too, hearing all of you. And I think leaning into difference and diversity and steering into it, seeing the things that make us unique and different, maybe that's somehow where our common narrative lies. When I was a little girl growing up in Europe, I always thought of America as the great melting pot where people could come together in all of their uniqueness and difference to build something bigger together. I think that with people like you taking the creative reins in our world, it's definitely a hope that I see, that I want to see materialize. And I'm looking forward to your next shows, especially you, Rob. You must be writing at the moment something great, I'm sure. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you,
it's been
SJ.
really wonderful
Thank you,
to hear
guys.
from you
Thank
all.
you, Dave and Dee.
Thank you, SJ. Thanks,
Good to
everybody.
see you, Felicia.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's back to work for me in Florida now. I know some of you guys are headed back to work too, but those of you who are continuing with the program, it's going to be amazing. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was amazing. So the Connors, Cheers, that 70s show, Buffy, The Punisher. What other scripted TV shows or films have influenced you, or your view of different partisan groups, or your style of conflict resolution? Would love more names, more recommendations in the chat so that we all have a list of things to watch. So really loved that incredible discussion on scripted entertainment specifically. And to transition into our next session, I'd like to also have us think a little bit about what sorts of documentaries, reality shows, or unscripted content has influenced you. So feel free to drop your responses in the chat there. So I'd like to now hand things off to our next moderator of our next panel, Joe Jensen. Hey, Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Roman. Appreciate it. Hey, guys, I'm Joe Jensen. I'm president of the nonprofit Ironlight Labs, and we bring unheard voices to the forefront through film and use storytelling techniques rooted in empathy and neuroscience to get people to come together around policy solutions. Statistics don't spark movement, stories do. And at Ironlight Labs, we focus on designing impact campaigns for documentary films to reach audiences through relatable messengers, so that way they hear and internalize the message, and we can use films as a tool to spark dialogue and just really create change. I'm so excited to be moderating our next panel, Documentaries and Reality TV, Real People, Real Solutions, where we will explore how documentaries and reality TV can help depolarize and bridge divides. I'd love to invite our panelists up on screen for this session, which includes Corey and Willie Robinson. They're the stars of Duck Dynasty and their upcoming show At Home with the Robinsons. We've got Abigail Disney. She's an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker, activist, co-founder of the nonfiction media production company Fork Films, as well as Level Forward. And we'll also have Pete Nix joining us. He is an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer, producer, director, and co-founder of Proximity Media. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, guys.
Everybody.
This is great. So, Abigail, I'd love to kick things off with you. If you could kind of give our audience just a quick rundown of your background and a little bit about your focus of your work.
Sure. I make documentary films, both by sort of being an executive producer and helping other people find the money they need, and by directing myself. And I did not start this until I was 46 years old. So I'm old, but I'm not a grizzled veteran. I'm grizzled, but I'm not a grizzled veteran. I make mostly films that are meant to be curious and interesting and invite people in and to hear things that they wouldn't have heard in other places.
That's excellent. And Pete, I'd love to give you the floor so you can tell folks more about your background and what drives you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, Abigail. It's been a minute. I've been at it for about 20 years now. I came to documentaries through creative writing, I thought I was going to be a screenwriter at one point in college, and I had to take a minor, and I took one in journalism. That I sort of found nonfiction through that, and just fell in love with it. Being from Boston, loosely inspired by Frederick Wiseman's work, who did a sort of decades long exploration of humanity through public institutions, and then also sort of being inspired by fiction, intimate, character-driven fiction work like The Wire. Embarked on a trilogy set in Oakland, looking at community through its public institutions, generally touching on hot button issues that were sort of resonating in the form of lots of hot discussion, access to healthcare, the relationship between community and police, and education. And so just finished that, and then in the interim started a company with Ryan Coogler called Proximity Media, where we're trying to sort of bring audiences in closer proximity to often overlooked subjects.
Excellent. That's great. And Corey and Willie, I know you both need no introduction, but would love to, what do you want to share with folks about your background and how you kind of got into this?
Well, I guess I never dreamed we'd have been on a call like this probably 10 or so years ago. We definitely, our family kind of came out of nowhere. My father started a duck call business that makes duck noises. And as I went and joined the company, I remember thinking, God, I wish he would have invented something easier to sell, because these things are really hard to sell to stores. And little did we know that we had something there. Actually, Corey was the one who kept saying we should do reality TV, which none of us watched reality TV. She did. And I said, well, I don't think we do anything, unusual. And she goes, oh, you're definitely unusual. Your family is not normal. And
I was like, yeah, y'all are just weird enough that this might work. But really, I'd like to say that we had kind of like a higher moral reason for it, but it really was to sell more duck calls. We were like, hey, I was watching like American Chopper and was seeing how like these guys that make motorcycles, are selling a bunch of product. And it's like, why don't we make a reality show about the family business? And I feel like this might, get us some more duck calls. And then we saw that it actually there was a lot more power behind it than just selling more duck calls. I mean, that was about product, but also it really impacted people in some powerful ways that I think we, never really expected. And we learned a lot in the process.
Oh, that's wonderful. So Abigail, kind of diving into our topic, what is it about documentary storytelling that you think provides a unique opportunity to kind of bridge divides?
Well, I think, first of all, an audience sits down to a documentary with a different set of expectations because they know it's at least to the best of a documentarian's ability true. And that actually kind of puts people in a different mind space for experiencing what they're seeing on screen. So you have a real opportunity in that for surprise and for inquiry. I really do think that with a documentary, you have a choice. You can make an exclamation point or you can make a question mark. And what we have generally is a lot of exclamation points. And when people think about documentaries, we think about these kind of didactic, all about persuasion sort of things. But the best documentaries for me are curious and engaged and interesting, and they invite dialogue.
I love that. And are there particular limitations you think with fictional storytelling that maybe documentaries don't have? You kind of just mentioned
again that they're definitely sort of working with not something that we know actually happened. And that just brings out a different set of attitudes about what people are seeing because it's all been crafted. It's a synthetic story rather than a story that formed organically on the earth.
Yeah. And Pete, what do you think? I mean, how do you think documentaries can kind of help bridge this partisan polarization that our country is going through right now?
I mean, the idea of empathy, the idea of stepping into somebody else's shoes has always been one of the ways that we think of to try to, because we are also siloed, geographically through class, sort of how we're grouped in America. I don't think lends itself incredibly well towards really seeing each other and hearing each other. And I think social media has just kind of amplified that. And it's, I think I heard something earlier about sort of, you can't hate in sort of in an intimate setting.
Yeah, close up. Yeah.
Close up. Yeah. I've experienced that so many times. And just with meeting people and in my work, I've traveled all over the country. I'm a little bit inclined toward it because I was, I'm a mixed race kid, and I was born, my birth mother was white, my birth father was black. I was born in 1968 into the story of race in America, and she had to give me up for adoption because her family threatened to disown her if she married this black man. And I was raised by a black family in Boston, went to white private schools, ended up at Howard University. So I've had this ability to kind of move through life and experience these questions, like sort of Abigail was saying, like we have question marks and then we have values and we have convictions. And a lot of times it's how do those two things sit next to each other? And I think the best documentaries do allow those kind of commingle. And we have to learn how to kind of hold sometimes contradictory truths simultaneously. And that intimacy and the complexity that documentaries often take audiences into, I think is really well suited to do that.
I think that's a great point. And, I know we also see vulnerability and authenticity in reality TV. So Corey and Willie, I'd love you guys to get your perspective here on, are there any unique opportunities in the reality TV space for kind of bridging these divides?
I think so. I think, if it's real, if reality TV, is based on what is real, right? So it's not that scripted. I remember doing the show so long, I thought, man, I just want to go do something scripted because you're really who you are. I can't go out. Yeah, I would have people come up to me in the grocery store and be angry because of what they just saw the other night. I'm like, it's a TV show, and so we're all okay. Yeah,
I'm me, but also this is a TV show and it's entertainment, and we're trying to, create something that's entertainment. So yeah, that is a really.
So I think we could bridge because in a way if it's a real family, you can be in their homes or in their businesses and see for sure people that are different than you. I'm sure that most people in America or across the world do not build duck calls for a living as a family business. However, so many people came up to us and we bridged a gap because they saw a family unit, they saw siblings, they saw a dad who was like that, a crazy uncle, they saw all these similarities and so they really felt like, even if they weren't like us, where we sat down and had dinner every night and said a prayer, they could maybe they would try to do that. That's, hey, you know what, we started sitting down and having dinner together and we saw the positive or we said a prayer together. And so so many people, and when Duck Dynasty first came out, it was so interesting. It was not just I think after years it was like, oh, that's maybe people in the South to watch that. But when this thing started, it was everyone. I never forget, I was in New York City. I was the guy who came out and got my luggage, said, I love your show. Went in and the lady that checked us in at a nice fancy hotel, and she said, oh, I love your show. The manager comes out and greets us and says, oh, we're so glad you're staying with us. I love your show. And then when the lady came out that was cleaning the room, she looked up and said, Duck Dynasty, I love that show. And so literally every level, everybody was different shades of colors. And because they saw that, because at its base, it was fun. And it was a comedy. It was family. It was something you could laugh at. And we didn't, tackle these hard things. And so I think there is a way for reality TV, if it's real, but we do have to not try to manufacture something that Corey and I face, like even from production companies who would come and say, well, you've got to fight. And remember, they would edit in they would bleep out curse words that weren't said, but they were like, well, that's what reality TV is. And so I think the more authentic it is, and we can see each other, how we're in different cities, whether it's in LA or New York or Louisiana or Georgia, once we can get in people's homes, I think it can bridge those gaps.
Yeah, we experienced some interesting stuff early on because of those. I heard Rob talking about in the last segment about kind of the writer's room and being very homogenous. It's like a bunch of young people. They're not married. They live in LA. They, that are writing. They're not generally people of faith necessarily or whatever. And so for us, there was some stereotypes that they had in us that early on that they were like, well, they always wanted me to be like getting my nails done or like chopping the vegetables or whatever. And I was like, I actually work, too. Like I'm a Southern woman that just like gets my nails done and chops vegetables all day, And then there were just certain things that they put, or even at the very beginning, they were like, okay, well, the women will get up and like go varmint hunting. And we're like, no, we don't go varmint hunting, but these stereotypes. And then for our kids, they thought our kids need to be constantly like rolling their eyes at their parents and back talking. And we're like, no, our kids don't do that,
Right.
So even in reality television, I think it's important that you do fight those stereotypes and not just fit into this like mold that like TV and entertainment, maybe these like sitcoms kind of.
Yeah, you can't let the production company or the networks guide them what the show is for, what is supposed to be reality, right?
Yeah.
And reality in your home.
But
they
try.
try.
Yeah,
They try
that's very strong. Yeah, that's very strong. We really had to fight against that a lot. And then we just did a show at home with the Robertsons for Facebook. And same thing, it's a fight for, whenever you're playing yourself, and you have to fight to maintain kind of like who you are and what you want to say for yourself on the screen.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys striving for that authenticity. Abigail, you have to forgive me. We have a saying around our office where this isn't a Disney movie, right? So,
Yes,
we lean into the imperfections because that is the reality. And that's the most important is our differences. And so on that, Abigail, do you think documentaries are reaching a politically diverse audience? Like I know reality TV has much broader distribution where sometimes documentaries do not. What have you seen there?
For sure, they're not, and not nearly enough. And it's really a shame because there's a lot of content that, I'm thinking of a film like Three Identical Strangers about these triplets that find each other in adulthood. And it's an incredible story. And like, there's no reason that everybody shouldn't be interested in a film like that. So there's a lot of content that's incredibly beautiful that just doesn't get to people who might love it. And when I made Armor of Light, which is sort of about a pro-life minister, someone who was really deep and committed in the movement, who is beginning to sort of ask himself whether his pro-life viewpoint is consistent with the gun culture that it also exists in all the same rooms he's in. And so we followed him for 2 years, kind of just starting to raise questions. We really wanted to make a film that respected Christians. That's actually quite hard to do because my pointy-headed liberal Northeastern friends in the documentary world, just didn't even understand how to be respectful, how to shoot from an angle, or light something in a way that was in the spirit of, this is a person we're elevating. We want him to be seen as intelligent, as inspirational, as aspirational. So we did cut a movie, I thought that was really, I think, friendly to conservatives because I just want the conversation. That's all I want. I don't know what the answers are. I don't know why we all think we're so arrogant that we know what the answers are, that we're in charge of persuading other people of them. So we really went out of our way, and we went into churches. We worked with somebody who'd been in the Bush administration as an evangelical outreach person. And we really got into a lot of churches and mega churches around the country. We got into religious institutions and so forth. It's hard to do because there's a lot of suspicion of a person like me. But what I've been saying is, like, I grew up in a very conservative household, very. And as I sort of got older and started to change into somebody they wouldn't have chosen for me to be, what I kept saying is, we still love each other, right? We still share the same values. We still are on the same page about everything important. Just like I feel like the marching orders I'm getting are different from yours. And so can we just talk about that? So I feel like I developed what I think of as bilingualism. I felt like I developed the capacity to stay in a conversation, even when it was making me uncomfortable, to continue to be curious about a person, even if all the external signs are telling me that this isn't a person I should be with or talk to or know. And to have the courage to stay in relationship with people who might be dangerous to me in terms of my peers and what they think of me. And so those are, it's like this, we're living in a really punishing environment. And like, we have to be willing to kind of risk those relationships, the people who are all telling us that we're right before we get out of bed every morning, and cross that divide and spend time and commit to relationships and be curious and stop trying to persuade people. So I really went out of my way to get the film seen really broadly. And I think we really succeeded. I still get emails from people. What was it out in 2015? Still getting emails from people about what it meant to them and how they went back to their families with a lot of questions. It was powerful to see.
I think that's great. And I appreciate your transparency. I think we've all probably experienced it I'm a more conservative libertarian, right? Impact producer. And I've had people hang up the phone when I tell them my background. It's like, you'll call back because you probably want to reach that audience. But I appreciate knowing that suspicion might happen on both sides. Pete, to kind of get you in here, do you think documentaries are limited, like in bridging this partisan divide that we see? Like, is that the right medium we should be using?
I do think that, there's a historical sort of relationship between nonfiction and maybe the liberal community. I think the ecosystem of funders, it has always been kind of left-leaning. That's changing. And we saw like a really interesting sort of thing start popping off. I don't know when it started happening, like these conservative documentaries like that made like tons of money. Kind of like the Yin to the Yang of Michael Moore's films. But those were, these movies are being kind of like pushed into the silos because they lent themselves toward that. But like Abigail's saying, there are so many, nonfiction is showing itself to be so commercially viable because just I think the form of nonfiction, the authenticity of it, the malleability of it, it's great storytelling. There are wide audiences out there. I don't think the studios, the marketers, the publicists have fully caught up to the market potential of nonfiction. So I think we're coming out of just familiarity or a certain style of nonfiction storytelling that is starting to, meet this moment of multiple perspective, diverse perspective, is also the urgency to find some kind of common ground, and it's just a matter of, I always talk about, the characters, how we represent our characters, this notions of moral superiority and really being careful to sort of try to place ourselves on a moral high ground beyond someone else versus moral clarity, which is we don't have to let go of our values in order to try to see somebody else and look at somebody else in a different way. And I think nonfiction, you're starting to see the potential for those films to sort of cross over left, right, and in the middle. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more of that in the coming years.
Oh, I just love that. So, trying to be a good moderator to keep us on time here. I guess my last question for each of you would be, it seems like what we've learned from neuroscience and storytelling is that it's really important to have an effective messenger, either like you can't be what you can't see or you're identifying with. And it seems like if you identify with the messenger, you're much more likely to hear that message. I'd love to hear from all of you some of your favorite movies because of that messenger, either you related to them or you thought they got it right, to kind of close out this panel.
That's an interesting question. I need to think for a minute. Can somebody else go first?
Yeah, we had talked about, we talk about this all the time. I do want to say Three Identical Strangers was an amazing.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
that was.
It was so powerful. And I think, obviously, I think the difference in documentary versus reality TV, I don't know that reality TV stirs all this emotion, but I remember by the end, I was so angry. I was angry at that government who, was testing this stuff out. And so there's
we have adopted children. So
right.
We have that in common and like understand that nature versus nurture and all of that as well. Yeah.
It's like you were so happy and then you're like, oh no, now I'm so mad. So that's why Corey and I love documentaries. And so, because they can compel those emotions as long as, and I think this shares the same with reality TV, as long as there's authenticity, as long as I'm not feeling like I've been tricked because somebody already has I'm going to shape your idea and I'm going to make the show. It's like we've done interviews, a ton of interviews where they want the interview they want. They don't want to just have a conversation. They're like, I'm going to see if I can get you to hear, get you to say this. And so total side note, but I do see that. One growing up for me, as far as differences, and I'm going really old school and I'm going to a TV show, but it was a show called Good Times.
And I remember I was young watching this show. I'm a young white kid who's in Northeast Louisiana. I'm very poor, and I'm watching someone in a totally different, part of the country, but there were so many similarities. We were poor. I understood what it meant. In fact, if you said, how was your childhood, Willie? We didn't have a lot of money, but it was good times, And I remember like the mom on the show, I remember the pain, like she was such a good actress in her face, like when they would lose a job or something would happen. And then these siblings and these relationships where, they may not even be a big deal at school, but they were a big deal in the home, and they were interesting and they were funny. And I saw that family together. And so that really impacted me, was watching, because there wasn't a lot of African-American kids, where I think there was 2 in the school that I went to. And, so we just didn't see that a lot. Just see families like that. I didn't see how they interacted, and it was that show for me, helped to bridge these divides.
Yeah,
I
thought
of
my
answer. Oh, sorry. I thought of my answer. Pete,
Right.
I just realized my answer is this: that the best messenger is no messenger, really, because like the minute you think there's a message, like you're out emotionally from whatever it is. And what we've tried to do in our films, I'm just about done with one right now, is let the story, be the message, because the story can accommodate nuance, and it can accommodate complexity, and it can bring you to an emotional understanding and something deeper than just an intellectual awareness. And again, I think persuasion is a terrible mistake. Persuading people, we just got to stop it with each other on all sides. It's insulting. It's insulting. When I was out there shooting with Rob, I was in among some very conservative Christians, and they very often, like, I was sort of like the gold star. If somebody could get me on board, if they could convert me, it was like they were going to win the sweepstakes. And so they were constantly. And it's insulting. It's insulting because somebody's coming up to you and saying, I don't think you have your life arranged correctly, and I'm going to tell you how to arrange it better. I'm, of course, open to having a conversation. I'm, of course, always open. But when someone comes to you with like a goal for you, that's insulting. And we need to stop doing that to each other.
Well said. Yeah. Corey, did you have someone you were going to highlight?
I think that's really good. And our show, when we did our show at Home with the Robertsons, that was really our goal. We were just like, we just want to have conversations, and we don't want to come into this conversation trying to persuade the person to think differently. Just let me hear, let me listen. And I think that's what a lot of people, we're really struggling with in our country, is actually like listening to other people. And the show did really well, but a lot of people hated that we listened and that we didn't make it right or say this thing or say that thing,
We got a lot of flack from Christians, which you would think that's strange. Probably more than any of the negativity was from Christians.
Yeah,
which is so
this
amazing.
Is about listening. We're inviting someone into our home to have a conversation, not to persuade or but to listen. But I was thinking about a documentary, The Pharmacist, I just thought it was really powerful, and it was in New Orleans, and it was dealt with this the drug industry down there and what had happened, and it was really powerful. And I'll never forget this one of the guys, when he said when he was going to prison, it was the first time he had been out of his neighborhood. He was riding in the bus to prison, and it was the first time he had left his neighborhood, and he's looking around and is like, whoa, this world is bigger than what I thought it was. And it was just a really powerful moment to think about that, somebody might not leave their neighborhood, and how that would, where they end up in life and how that would affect. Yeah. Sure. And then, that was a documentary about a man who lost his son. He was buying drugs and got killed. And then it led him on this path that, so it was, you were following along with the story, but along the way, you're just learning things and seeing people and understanding people's lives. And I think that was really powerful for me.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Pete, did you have one you wanted to share as we wrap up?
I guess I got a couple films that sort of jump to mind. One is a film that not only looks at America, but also looks at China, which we have a very complicated relationship with other nations and how we see them and how we perceive them. And this film, American Factory, I think really allowed audiences into this space and dealt with class and dealt with sort of ideas of American identity, the other, in a way that I believe is completely universal and should be seen. That's an example of a movie that I think could be held by the entire spectrum of class, political ideology, race, etc. And then the other idea I think is important just to remember is, we have a lot of scar tissue in this country. For me, on my dad's side of the family, going back to slavery, and these are all things that are so difficult to talk about, but the notion of sort of trauma and recognizing sort of trauma. We've just gone through a collective trauma with COVID and loss, these ideas of loss. And so another film that really moved me was Nomadland. And what that movie did for me was it took me into a place where I could understand my own personal trauma in a deeper way. And I also saw in that environment what I perceived, probably from what my understanding of sort of navigating this particular world is, there's a lot of very conservative, the nomads who live out in sort of California and some of these regions there's a lot of libertarian, sort of Trump-ish people who are freedom, don't tread on me, living off the grid type people, but that was never really articulated in a literal way. We just went into their lives and experienced their lives in a non-polemic, experiential way that I found to be very powerful. And so those are two that I think stand out for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely powerful. I'll share mine as we wrap up. We shot a short doc, which is going to be stuff itself, with a very short 20-minute film about this guy, Larry Williams. He spent 42 years in prison, and he let us follow his first week of freedom. And I knew that there was like 10,000 Americans that are released from prison each week, but until I had met someone up close and had that vulnerability, 42 years is a really long time. And just to see how he needed housing and a job and how he wanted to work. I rewatch that movie sometimes just when I need grounding, because his wisdom and his, just perspective on things is very different than mine and just very humbling. So that's definitely one that kind of knocked me in the face. Well, just going to close out the panel. You guys are amazing. Thank you for your time today, for your words of wisdom, for your hope, kind of for the future of storytelling with documentaries and reality TV. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it, everyone.
Thanks, Joe.
Just a great, thanks guys. Just a great start to that important conversation. And so before we move to our next panel, I'd like to introduce another brief industry insight from Christian Toto.
I am Christian Toto. I am the editor of Hollywood in Toto. It's a website that is aimed at people who are right of center and still love entertainment. I've been reviewing films for about 20 years now, and I've realized that looking at my colleagues, the vast majority are left of center, and there's no crime in that. But often their views, their perspectives don't align with half the country. And I thought, well, I think that half deserves to have a voice for them. And I've created this website. I have a podcast, Right on Hollywood, and I do some other work as well. But that's the main thrust of what I do, is looking at Hollywood, at entertainment from a right of center perspective. If you go on the social media, you think that the Civil War is going to happen next week. If you look at the news headlines, sometimes you have the same reaction. I think if you kind of go out in public and meet with people face to face, often we're very kind to each other. We're open, we're accommodating, but certainly there are lots of partisan flames that are alight right now. You can blame the media, you can blame social media. There's lots of reasons why, but it's certainly worse than I can recall. I'm 53. I can't speak beyond that, but it seems uglier than it's been in quite some time, and it's sad. I think that Hollywood, and this is what I do for a living, has been sort of more partisan, more angry, more divisive than I can recall. Whether it's the comedians who are on the late night circuit, whether it's the content we see, the messages kind of embedded in certain programming. I think that we're hungry for, and we could really use more stories that unite us instead of dividing us. And there's certainly room for everything. There's certainly room for left of center comedians blasting politicians on the right and vice versa. But I think too much of the content we see is firing us up instead of maybe reminding us why we actually have so much in common. I think for entertainment to be a positive force, for there to be a positive change within the Hollywood landscape, is a bit of empathy, an understanding that people have different views and yet have many things in common. I think there are sort of factors in play that make the partisanship in entertainment more appealing, more viral worthy, maybe more economically sound. But I also think that, hey, if you put out some great content out there that appealed to the left and the right, I think people would come running to it. I think we're starved for that kind of entertainment.
Great. Thank you, Christian, for his input. And now I'd like to hand things off to Sandra DeCastro Buffington. She's going to be moderating our next panel, Success Abroad.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra DeCastro Buffington, and I'm president of Story Action and co-producer of an upcoming feature documentary, Brainwashed. I work with Hollywood's writers and producers to create stories of social impact, and I take creatives around the world on story tours. I also work with creative capitals in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. I will be moderating the next panel focused on successes abroad, where we'll explore how entertainment media has shifted social norms and bridged divides in conflict zones outside of the US. I'd like to invite our amazing panelists, Lena Slock-Mulder and Betsy Palack, on screen to join us in exploring whether entertainment media can help to repair extreme divisions in conflict zones in other parts of the world, and what lessons might apply in the US. So by way of introduction, Lena Slock-Mulder is Senior Vice President at Search for Common Ground and works with entertainment media for conflict transformation in divided societies in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And Betsy Palack is a professor of psychology and international affairs at Princeton University. And Betsy is a MacArthur Genius Award winner whose pioneering work focuses on prejudice and conflict reduction. So welcome, Lena and Betsy. Okay, everybody's here. All right. So we're not accustomed to seeing our country as a conflict zone, but we're on that path. So having looked at other troubled regions of the world, we see there are lessons for us to learn. Lena, can you say a word about your work, especially as it relates to entertainment?
Sure, Sandra, and thank you so much. Great to see you again. I'm actually joining you from Yemen, where I am supporting my team here, and where our very first program was actually producing radio and television drama. And why is that? Because, across the world, 30 countries for nearly 40 years, we're trying to transform conflict. We're trying to end the violent conflict. And we do a lot of things that you would expect, mediation and dialogue and trying to reach agreement. But in each country, in each community, we also know that the power of stories is critical. The power of stories to take those behaviors of dialogue and listening and understanding and make them popular, make them expected, make them appreciated and accepted. And so through the drama and the reality TV shows, we create stories which break stereotypes, we redefine notions of heroism, and we spark people's imagination to, particularly in places like in Yemen and other protracted conflicts where people haven't been able to envision peace. We use the power of drama and stories to help that reach their hearts.
So Lena, you've been doing this work for decades all over the world, and you've been employing media as a lever and have been involved in the production and testing of content. How do you go into a divided community and really figure out what stories to tell and how to bring in the right partners?
Yeah, one of the things we noticed, Sandra, is that as we've been hearing in the panels today, the writers and the creatives have also experienced these conflicts. They've been pulled into polarized spaces because of their identities, because of the conflict. And so, in each of the countries where we work, from Congo to Myanmar to Indonesia, we start by trying to understand what those dividing lines are, and then seek creative writers, directors, producers from across those dividing lines.
Now, what they're really good at is telling their stories, and often those stories of tragic and very sad, violent conflict. So our role often is to, ask questions about how might these conflicts end otherwise? How might we tell stories of change? How might we understand that, even people who've done horrible things and committed violent crimes, maybe they actually want to make new choices. And what can those stories be? And we do that, of course, looking at research and studying what are some of the trends and the barriers. But a lot of it is really that creative process of helping writers to understand the other perspective and begin to write new stories that perhaps haven't been experienced in that context already.
We just heard Corey and Willie Robertson talk about the reality TV programming they've created. What do you see as the unique power of reality TV here? And can you give us some examples of where you've seen it work and have a profound impact?
Yes, absolutely. It's true that, a lot of our television shows have been dramas, the cop show in Congo, or the stories about the football team in Myanmar, which included the first ever depiction of a Muslim character on air. But we've also produced reality TV shows in about 7 or 8 countries because they offer that sense of credibility. They break through that sense of, well, that might be a nice story of collaboration, but that can't happen here. And so we put that on air. And we take often these, iconic formats of reality TV, like American Idol, and we bring that to the political context in Palestine. And we've produced 2 seasons of a show called The President, where young people from around the country went through elimination rounds to sell their ideas and pitch their ideas to be elected the president in the reality TV show. We also took the Survivor idea of a reality TV show, and we tackled the issue of mistrust between the police and young people in Nepal. And we created a reality TV show where through elimination rounds, people had to try to become a police officer. And in the process, we unpacked these stereotypes and prejudices and really unlocked that sense of possibility that reality TV can also bring. And with a whole lot of fun and with the making of new celebrities, as we all know, reality TV is really good at doing.
What incredible work, Lena. I'm just amazed. When you talked about helping people see a different perspective, that the content creators themselves are rooted in their own realities, what methodology do you use that comes from the search for common ground approach that helps shape content?
I mean, I think a lot of it is that we would often bring people through an understanding of this, what we call the common ground approach, which is based on a number of key insights. One that we've heard under the surface in all of the panels today about the fact that people have multiple identities and that conflict often simplifies that and pulls us away from many parts of our identities into a polarized, one-dimensional view of ourselves. And for writers to remind themselves of the multiplicity of identity, that's one of the key things. The other is key about understanding how people change. And people change when they feel trusted, when they feel supported, when they're not going to face humiliation, when their dignity is going to be honored. And so, in the arc of change that the writers need to explore in these journeys of these characters that we write, it's very important that we don't present simplistic and unrealistic views of change. So a lot of our work is also about understanding how do people move from fear and hatred towards being ready to trust. Oftentimes moving back into fear, into trust, back and forth before that lived experience of collaboration is enough for them to move forward and really embrace it, celebrate it, and popularize it with their families and communities. And so a lot of those workshops really, they mirror the work that we do in communities, but we help the writers to make sure that they don't oversimplify or produce these piece messages or make everybody suddenly get along, because that won't work and that won't resonate with the audiences. So as Search and other international organizations begin to focus on the US, how much of what you've been doing overseas with entertainment media might be applicable here? How would it be different? And what kind of challenges and opportunities do you see right now?
Well, I've been really inspired by many of the ideas that I've heard so far this evening. And I think that, a lot of the insight about helping writers to go on a journey and be able to understand other perspectives is step number one. And there's so many opportunities and organizations that I'm hearing today are ready to help writers to do that. Secondly, I would embrace so many of the reality TV formats that could really bring a gamification and a fun sense of what it really is like to collaborate. One of the key things that can incentivize people to want to listen and to want to turn their adversaries into allies is to celebrate the rewards and to show how great it feels when you actually are able to transform that relationship. And I think reality TV shows can do that. Even something as simple as Wife Swap, right, which is a hilarious, great format that really already explores different values, could be done really with a perspective of trying to explore people's differences and also reveal what people share. Dancing with the Stars, Morgan Spurlock's 30 Days I don't think that's been mentioned yet in the many ideas this evening, but those kinds of formats which really help people to step into another reality, I think are critical. And, I'll echo once more that it's really hard to hate up close. And I think that this work can resonate. And just to remember as well that when people are offered the opportunity to change their perspective without being humiliated, I think that is also some of the stories that we need to highlight in the US as well.
Thank you, Lena. So Betsy, can you say a few words about your work as it relates to entertainment?
Sure. Hi, and thanks for having me. And Lena, I just have to say, it's great to be on this panel with you. I don't know if you remember me, but I was, green graduate student when we met up in Burundi many years ago. And when I met Lena, she was, mentoring and leading and inventing with one of the bravest and most creative journalist teams in Burundi I've ever met anywhere. I think when I met her, she was, as a vegetarian, maybe surviving on bananas and cigarettes alone. And I was just in awe of her. So it's just really great to see you here. And yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing for a long time is trailing around after creators and producers, journalists like Lena and others in organizations and in industries like Nollywood or, in even the telenovela industry here in the States. But I did get my start in Rwanda, where I was a graduate student doing a dissertation, and I was really interested in this show that followed a Romeo and Juliet storyline. I think I saw some suggestions for more Romeo and Juliet, and it turns out, the scriptwriters in Rwanda who wrote that story weren't aware of the Shakespeare version. So I think that that's one of these stories that is pretty universal. And I was following this radio soap opera that had been introduced following 10 years following the genocide in Rwanda. And my question was, does entertainment education, which is such a big genre all over the world, not just for reducing conflict, but for encouraging people to use the right seeds and to take precautions against HIV/AIDS, whether that could be used in a reconciliation process. And so that's how I got my start, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So I'm the pointy-headed academic who shows up and says, how do we capture this? What really is changing here? And how would we know? Can we create a counterfactual whereby some members of the audience are exposed to different kinds of media? We can compare them over time and so forth. So that's been my role in this industry so far.
So Betsy, your research focuses on prejudice and conflict reduction. And you've argued that changing people's perceptions of social norms, their view of what's normal or desirable in a community or peer group, can alter behaviors in profound ways. We love your pointy head, by the way. Can you elaborate on that, and what are the implications for entertainment media?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that maybe what I can come here to say today is that the power of stories is they're social. When I came to start studying media, there were a lot of different ideas about what some of these radio soap operas and movies and documentaries could do. One of them is that it would change people's beliefs, their personal attitudes, their personal convictions. And another idea, almost in contradiction to that, is that it might not touch those beliefs or personal convictions for a while, but it might tell them which way the wind is blowing. It might tell them, you know what, a lot of people like this show, a lot of people, like these messages. You may not disagree with it yet, or maybe never, but I'm just letting you know this is a hit show and a lot of people like what's in it. That's what I mean by a social norm. It's which way the wind is blowing. It's what do other people think. And one thing that media really does well is tell us what other people think. Even in a country like ours, where media is so fragmented and we're all watching and listening to different things, shows and podcasts and documentaries break through and we know what's a hit. And so my findings in Rwanda, but also many other places, have been that it is really hard to change people's beliefs and their personal convictions. And on a certain level, we have to respect those as, personal possessions, right? People kind of feel about their beliefs like they would their personal things. But media that is so compelling that it changes your idea of which way your society is thinking or leaning, or at least which way your friendship group is thinking and leaning and celebrating and enjoying, that can have very powerful effects over your behavior, maybe even more so about what you personally think.
So Betsy, we only have like 2 more minutes, but I'm wondering, you've been working with entertainment media and measuring how it shifts cultural norms around intergroup attitudes and behaviors. How transferable are those findings to our current state of partisan polarization in the US? Can it work at home?
I think that context matters so much, but I also think that humans are humans. I don't think that there's anything particularly Rwandan about the Rwandan findings I had, or anything particularly Nigerian about the findings we had in Nollywood. I think that, like many people have said here today, people don't want to be lectured to, people want to be entertained. They love a good story, and they love sharing good stories. They love having common points of reference where they can talk to one another about characters they know, whether those are characters they know in real life or characters they know on a screen or over the airwaves. And I think that stories that manage to rise to this level will have a hold on our collective imagination and will make the normal. And I think that that's what we're all after, is stories that break through, that hold our collective attention and that help us to make what's normal, whether that normal is violence, whether that normal is argumentation and conflict, or whether that normal is listening.
This is amazing. I wish we had another hour because I have so many more questions, but I would invite both of you to join me on taking some writers and producers on storytellers to other parts of the world than their respective homes, and really taking them in total immersion into communities they would never visit on their own. And then we can see what stories emerge from that and measure the impact on viewers. Thank you for the incredible work you do, Lena, and you, Betsy. I have so much respect for you, and I hope that we'll continue to involve you in our work with Hollywood's writers and producers, just the way you do overseas. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Nice to see you, Betsy.
Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Okay, back to you, Roman.
Wow. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, Lena. So it's worked overseas, which means that maybe it can work in the United States too. What I've heard in the last 2 sessions is that maybe we shouldn't try to change people's minds. It's disrespectful, as Abigail mentioned, and it's not effective, as Betsy and Lena both mentioned. But instead, it's about shaping a new idea of what's normal, what's normative. So I'd love to prompt us all with another quick poll in the chat. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to answer. Okay. Well, thank you. So now let's listen to another brief industry perspective, this time from Daryl Taja.
If we are telling stories that entertain us, stories that have simple and clear messaging in terms of servicing the human condition itself, that we have more common ground than we have differences, that is a relatable way of reaching a broad swath of the American populace. I think that we have a social responsibility as a privileged group of people who have been allowed to tell stories to the world, and we should look at that social responsibility and take it serious and try to create content that messages the proper things and the right things that would allow for us to bridge the gap between the political divides.
Thank you, Daryl, for that perspective. Now let's get to our final conversation of the day. I'll hand things off to Jeff Chow, who will be leading the next session.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Chow. I am an executive at Digital Domain. It is one of the world's best independent visual effects studios, but not enough about me. We've heard from social science and practitioner experts, creators of fiction and nonfiction, and success stories from around the world. Now the question is the entertainment industry going to do anything about this? Can Hollywood take this on as a social impact issue? It seems that we're locked in a dynamic of tribal division. It permeates so many other justice and equity issues that many of the industry care about, and there seems to be practical tools made available to make a difference, and maybe even expand the audience and increase the bottom line. Will Hollywood be able to wrap its arms around this? Where do we go from here? How can we take this challenge of depolarization? And so to help me wrap this all up, I'd like to invite our panelists to come on screen. Joining us today, we have Riaz Patel, executive producer, 2-time Emmy nominee and NAACP Image Award nominee. Yolanda Cochran, Cochran, Senior Vice President of Live Action Long Form Production at Viacom CBS, and Christina Lindstrom, Managing Director at Sea Change Institute and Head of Impact Measurement and Assessment at SIE Society. So I'm gonna go around real quick. If you guys could introduce yourselves, give yourselves a little quick background about yourselves and the focus of your work, and then I'll have some pointed questions. Starting with Riaz.
Oh, you gotta mute myself.
Hi, Riaz. How are you?
Oh, there we go. Hey, how are you? So I am a director, executive producer, show creator. I'm what's known as a showrunner, which means that a network trusts me to run a show both creatively and financially. Have worked for almost every major network over the years. But my perspective is slightly unusual because I was born in one hemisphere and raised in the other. I would wake up in a Muslim house in a Christian world, go to Jewish schools where everyone thought I was a Hindu. And so the idea of diversity is something that has always been a part of my life. I'm gay, and so there was always that. And so I've always navigated my career and my shows with that perspective. How can I create projects that will allow people to shift their perspectives about their body, about the world? But shifting perspective is sort of my forte. That's what I do. And I'm delighted to be here.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Cochran. I am currently Senior Vice President of Production with Viacom's Kids and Family at Nickelodeon and Awesomeness Television. I've spent my career initially for a good about 20 years in feature film production.
and about 5 years ago transitioned into television. I'm a member of the board of directors of the Producers Guild and also the governing committee with the Academy. I've done a lot of work in the space of, safety and also DEI, serving on the anti-harassment task force with the PGA, as well as a safety captain with Time's Up. And my focus has been primarily in physical production, which includes creating, safe spaces for our creators and our crews. And I've also done, some of my own producing of movies and shorter projects. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, Christina Lindstrom.
Hi, my name is Christina. Most of my experience has been at the intersection of social justice and entertainment. I started my career at Amnesty International, helping them launch an Artists for Amnesty department, and then worked with Jeff Chow at Participant Media for a long time on the social impact, social action division. The past about 7 to 10 years, most of my work has migrated to more research, impact tracking, impact research and reporting to help my clients tell the stories of impact that they're creating, both with their content and very frequently with campaign work that is associated with that content. So right now at the Sea Change Institute, I manage the portfolio of media work that we have with a team of behavioral scientists. So studying popular media, trying our best to understand what's being presented and make sense of that in terms of how we think about what we see in the world, and also to try to improve the world as we know it.
Christina, Riaz, let's start with you. So a few years back, the media reported that you were Glenn Beck's new BFF. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did you get the connection? How did you find common ground? Because you guys are very different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, totally. So I was in Orlando. I had a family wedding, and brown people's weddings go on late. And so we were dancing and everyone was up. And at about 1 a.m., about less than a mile away, is when Mateen walked into the Pulse nightclub and shot all the people he shot. And so the next morning, my family and I are walking downtown Tampa, watching peoples watch us wearing our ethnic garb. And it was, it was yet again happening to me that people's perception of what I was, who I was not accurate. And it had happened when I was a child during the Iran hostage crisis. It happened when I lived in downtown in New York City during 9/11. And I thought, I'm not powerless this time. And so I went back to LA and sat down with my agents and said, who do we know in conservative media? Because they won't see someone like me. They won't see the humanity of someone who's Muslim, who's gay, who's a parent. And so ended up reaching out to several people through back channels at ICM, is my agency, and got onto Tommy Laren's show. And then from there, Glenn Beck's producer said, we would like you to talk to him. And I said, I'm happy to do it, but I'll come do it live, one-on-one for an hour. I'm not doing sound bites. I'm not doing Zoom. I want to talk to him. I do no earpieces, nothing, no producers in the ear, just sit down, 1 hour conversation. And we met. And about halfway through that conversation, which was taped live, we realized that we weren't the cliches that we thought. And so obviously we didn't agree. Obviously there are things we disagree about, but we were trying to show that these conversations could happen. And we ended up producing about 25 shows. I EP'd all of them, the content, bringing people who were progressives from Seattle working in microloans to talk to conservatives in Dallas working in poverty reform, and seeing that they were almost exactly overlapped. Just their wording, their phraseology was different. And so I received a huge backlash from my own side. I many times in interviews, I have been asked the last question, can you please explain your relationship with Glenn Beck? And I'm like, it was a 25 show project. I've lost friends for that. I've absolutely been dragged in so many ways by the liberals that I would ever sit down and give a conversation. And I'm a very practical person. And I think tables for negotiating and figuring things out are in the middle. They're not on one side or the other. And so to get people to come to the middle to have these conversations about how do we stop children from being shot in schools? How do we stop Black men from being persecuted in cities? Those have to have conversations, not just inside with our side, but with the other side. And so this article came out in Daily Beast where it was a bit of a character assassination of me that I was being played.
but I don't think there is a way to venture into the divide in America without being attacked from one side or the other. And being a gay Muslim from Pakistan, I'm not my first rodeo being attacked. So it just, it happens. But anytime I've ever engaged with the other side in a thoughtful way, my own side absolutely comes after me.
That has a lot to say about, being specific. What advice do you have to share with us, with the rest of us, for forging these creative partnerships? Because, it really took, an act of destiny for you and Glenn Beck to come together. But how do we do this practically every day? How do we do that? Do you have any tips for us?
So because I produce reality, it really bothered me. The thing that I couldn't sleep at night from 2016 was people stopped talking. And to me, the only way I could ever humanize myself as a Muslim, as a gay parent now, is through conversation. I'm not what you think I am. Allow me to tell you what I am, my experiences of life, seeing it through my eyes. Let me tell you that. And so having done it, I would do it with 2 people, with 5 people, with 20 people, with 30 people. I did it in rural Alaska. I did it in downtown New York. I did it in the South. And watched when it would go off the rails, when it would connect, and came up with a 4-part system that Forbes has profiled twice, called EPIC. It's 4 steps: EPIC. Equalization is E. Personalization, information gathering, and collaboration. The most important one is E. That if you are engaging with someone, whether it's talent, as a producer, as a collaborator, as a conversation, if you are not going in with a sense of equality, real equality, human to human, I have as much to learn from you as you have to learn from me, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of oxygen. And so I really do think it has to start with equalization. You have to see the person has merit and worth in telling you things you don't know, just as you are about to tell them things they won't know because they haven't lived your life and you haven't lived theirs. And so equalization is the key. And then the next one is personalization. It's useless to start referencing, I saw this on CNN, I saw this in Fox, I saw this, because then you end up with these piles of data that you cannot see past. And so it has to be, this was my experience of racism. This was my experience of COVID. This was my experience. What was your experience? Personalization is the only way we can move and have a conversation one-to-one. Otherwise, you end up with 6 people in a room and 75,000 opinions because people keep bringing opinions into the room. So personalization is huge in keeping conversations on track. But equalization, to actually see the other side, whatever that other side may be to you, as equals, truly equals. That is the key.
I'm getting blown away here. I mean, all right, as a gay Muslim producer, do you see any lessons that you've learned from the Entertainment's DEI efforts? How does addressing extreme partisan polarization square with current DEI efforts in the entertainment industry? And are they compatible? Are they just radically different animals?
I mean, I would love to hear Yolanda's perspective on this because I think she's much more in the weeds of this than I am. I will say that whenever DEI has been brought in either to a production I'm now on the board of trustees of a documentary company called Odyssey Impact. I'm on the diversity committee. And the last time we had a meeting, I said, I'm really tired of this fake sense of diversity. That's tokenism. I'm really tired of checking the box that we have one of every ethnicity when we actually don't know if we have diversity of thought in there. And I think we are stuck in these efforts because, again, these efforts are overseen by networks and studios and insurance companies. So they're not always tailored to what exactly we need. In my experience of DEI, it has been very frustrating. And I can tell you, and I'm a liberal, it is completely anti-conservative thought. I sit constantly on board meetings and I'm like, we have absolutely no diversity of thought here. We all look different, but we have the exact same opinions. And we're going to reach the inside of the audience. We're never going to get to the other side if we don't adjust what our opinion of diversity is. That white is just not white. That's a huge percentage of the population categorized as one label. I've never liked that. It's never sits well with me. People talking about white in some way. I wasn't born in America, but I've never become comfortable with it. And so I think we have a lot of vocabulary that gets used that is developing. But what I have seen, anytime I'm in it, it's such tokenism, and it doesn't help. It makes everyone much more self-conscious. And I've seen people absolutely stop talking, absolutely not comfortable talking because they'll get it wrong. And then they could get fired or they could get written up. And so I think, again, what kept me up at night is people started to be afraid to talk. They were afraid of talking. And I don't know if DEI efforts that I have seen in my productions, the companies I'm in, have helped that as much, have helped the fear of conversation, because that's the only way. I can only understand someone's life until I talk to them. I didn't live their life. I can only understand it when I talk to them. So if people don't feel comfortable talking, they're not going to share and open up. And I think that's what we need. I don't think you can regulate people's hearts. I think they have to really feel moved to understand the other side. And I think that's what I try to do in my projects is shake people's perspectives in a way that is not lecturing, that is just to say, I don't know the right way, but I can show you your perspective of the world as one perspective. I know I don't know the right one, but I can show you yours as one, and here's someone else's, and here's someone else's. But DEI, I've been frustrated by, in my experience, is boots on the ground in Hollywood.
Okay, let's transition to Yolanda. What do you think about DEI, and how is that applying towards the industry? And do you agree with Riaz? Riaz?
I mean, I love hearing your perspective, Riaz, and you know, to your point, being able to have a forum where you can make that point is so important. And so it's speaking to what you're talking about, and what is going to be, you know, actually tangibly impactful is validation of people's experiences and recognizing people's humanity and bringing all of that into the conversation. I mean, here's the thing. I find that DEI efforts are hugely imperative because for so many years, so many voices were missing from the conversation. I think that we have a pendulum swing that potentially speaks to what Riaz is talking about of making protocols where those voices are allowed, are given, you know, some space, and understanding where people have been marginalized is creating an atmosphere where maybe some other voices are being pushed to the side or in a place where they're uncomfortable speaking because they're afraid. I do believe that, speaking to what Riaz is talking about, as far as the efforts that are going into, you know, creating some equity and some balance in the creative, you know, whether it be the people, the storytelling, all of that, I think the flaw is probably that the people and the organizations who are designing the diversity don't understand how to actually create it and don't understand how to do that. And creating that diversity of thought. I produced a podcast on race and gender in Hollywood. And, you know, part of that, we talked about the fact that it sounds too squishy, but it needs to be organic. If you are bringing in people who have a different perspective, then that's going to naturally matriculate throughout the process because they're going to bring other people along. And if they have a real genuine plan to have diversity, we're going to have all of the perspectives, including those perspectives that don't necessarily agree with us. And one thing I've been lamenting about lately, as it pertains to various things that are happening with, you know, some of the upheaval with Time's Up and, you know, various content that is currently out in the zeitgeist that people are arguing about, is I don't feel like we can make real progress for each other if we can't figure out what is the mechanism to engage with either offenders or people who are, you know, have a diametrically opposed viewpoint, but that you feel like is the wrong viewpoint. How do you get them to a place where we're in the goodness if we're just saying, okay, you're completely out of the society, you're out of the discussion, you're out of the dialogue. Like, how do we get to that progress if we can't figure out what that mechanism is?
So these mechanisms are all coming together between DEI and depolarization. It seems like they're the same. You're using the same mechanisms. Christina Lindstrom, I know you and I have been alumni of a certain ivory tower called Participant Media. How do you think we think about these things just in this context of depolarization? Like, are we ready to take this on? It has all of your training in your past career given you the tools that you need for this moment? That's a loaded question. I think, I mean, in terms of at participant, I mean, we haven't been at participant for a while, but the way that we used to try to tackle this in the social action department was just to try to get as many different voices and as many different people in the room as possible for all of our events, which wasn't easy. I happen to agree with Yolanda. I really think diversity and inclusion efforts are the key to basically everything. I think if we can do that well, and we are nowhere close to doing that well, then that will solve a lot of these other issues in terms of really what so many of the other panelists today have been talking about. In the antidote, I don't think, for negative representation and for stereotypes is not positive representation. It's just realism. It's being able to hear news stories, being able to hear real people and different things than what we've been hearing in the past, some things with authenticity. We are doing, Sea Change is currently contracted to do a large representation study for Amazon Studios that's looking at the past 10 years of popular media. And as somebody that has been researching media for at least 10 years, I have been shocked at the total lack of diversity, both in front of and behind the camera. I think once we really start to deconstruct what representation means, so not just taking a look at how many Latinos are on screen or how many brown people versus white people are on screen, but what are the spaces and places that certain bodies and certain people are able to inhabit in entertainment? As we're starting to look into that, diversity is nowhere close to being actually representative of the worlds that we live in. It is so one-sided that there's no possible way that's not affecting how we think and view the world and how we think and view ourselves. So that needs to be completely deconstructed and built up in a more realistic way. So, and I would agree, just based on my more limited experience working in this topic area with Yolanda, that oftentimes some of those individuals that are responsible for creating these environments lack the skills or even simply the courage to do that. And so a lot of these efforts, I think, is not just looking at research and looking at data, but then partnering that data with tools that can be used to facilitate really constructive conversations. Because conversations with people around difficult topics like race are uncomfortable and they're difficult, and we all need help doing it. And so it can't just be partnered with information that comes to a production company or to a studio that appears to be like a wagging finger, like you're doing all of these things wrong and therefore we need to change it. It has to be a totally different conversation. So that's what we tried to do at participant. It was really, really difficult. And I think that part of that is a result of our own personal networks. We need to expand our own personal networks and the people that we are interacting with every day, so that that then translate into all the work that we're doing in terms of mobilization, activation. So at participant, whenever we did events, it was very easy to reach out to folks at the ACLU or Amnesty International because those were our friends. We knew them personally. Until we expanded our own personal networks, it's really difficult to have as easy a connection in terms of holding a really new and different conversation. So, I
propose that we have this conference live next time instead of Zoom.
Well, that would be a good start. Yeah, that would be a good start.
Can you tell us how you would go about measuring this stuff? How do you measure the impact of this? How do we even, DEI is one thing and it's probably current, but depolarization is right there, right lockstep, right behind it or in front of it or around it. What tools do we have right in front of us today? And what tips do you have for us?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I am. And then I'm going to open it up to everybody else because.
So I'm going to hop on a soapbox real quick and I'll make it fast. That media literacy, I think, is something that I would love to see
entertainment, both scripted and non-scripted, producers get more and more involved in. I think it's only responsible filmmaking for those of us that are producing the films to also be involved in how audiences are thinking critically about the content that they're watching every day. This is imperative. The US is behind in this. We lack any sort of national policy for media literacy in this country. And the results of technology really being able to continue to polarize us and exacerbate the polarization that already exists, and also disseminate false information makes everything worse. I mean, if we're not actually looking at the same things as facts and having the same conversation, it's going to be really difficult to have a constructive conversation. The answer to a lot of this work is ensuring that adults and students and everyone across the board is really able to understand and think critically the media that's in front of them, both in terms of social media and on every other platform they're looking at. So representation studies and work is part of that. So that's my go-to. I would love to see us become more and more involved in that. And those tools already exist today. We need more of them. We need support, and these are not expensive. This is not an expensive endeavor, but it would be very helpful to have the industry more on board in terms of helping with this effort of educating their audiences.
And Riaz, just to spend one more minute on your epic, that, you know, you went EP, but then I didn't get the IC. So would love for you to finish that up. And then any last thoughts?
So E equalization, personalization, I is information gathering. Generally, when people are talking, I'm finding a lot of times people are not listening, they're waiting to speak. And so the mindset of information gathering is, I'm not judging what you say. I'm not giving you my feedback to what you say. I'm not giving my reaction. I'm not comparing. I'm information gathering. How old were you when that happened? Because anytime I've ever talked to someone and had these conversations hundreds of times about racism or guns or abortion, it always drills down to some event when they were young, something they saw their parents struggle with. So it always comes back to a real specific story. So information gathering is the person, when they're listening, I'm here to gather information. I'm not here to judge anything. And then after equalization, personalization, information gathering, you have a track record. You've actually essentially humanized yourselves to each other with personalizing your opinions. Then you collaborate. Then you go to, okay, let's talk about what gun laws we can change. And I found so many times that if you don't have the equalization, there's no point in even starting the conversation if you don't see each other as equals. Personalization, information gathering keep us out of judgment. And then collaboration is, okay, the truth is in the middle. You know, when we need to figure out a solution to something, whether it's poverty or guns, it's probably not going to be either or. It's going to be some version of both. And so to me, the collaboration is the last key, is that it's not going to be either or. It's not going to be my solution or yours. Chances are, in the reality of the world, it's going to be some version of both. And so collaboration comes as the last step. And I found we've done hundreds of these conversations, and they are incredibly effective. We just did tests in Utah, 3 tests, 50 college students, all backgrounds. Could we bring them unable to speak to each other about issues? Could we, in 60 minutes, we call it connect effect, connect them emotionally to each other, that they could now talk about these things with the idea of being in a collaborative space, being in a place where they were not going to be judged. And it went amazingly. And people saw issues differently, because the only thing I tell people is, I'm just here to show you it's just not one way, that everything is an edit and every edit has an intention. So as long as you can see the world different ways, talking to different strangers, that's how I think we go forward, because everything on your screen is curated for you. Everything in your life is curated for you. You have to have conversations with strangers. And in a touchless world, that's going to be harder. But I do think the only way to break your own echo chamber is to talk to strangers at airports, at bank lines, somewhere. What are you seeing of the world? Because what I'm seeing is A, I know you're seeing something different. And unless we talk, we won't know, because our screens are curating us separately.
Amazing. Yolanda, wrap this up for us. How do we
love it.
collaborate?
I mean, yeah, exactly. You know, I feel a little bit in awe of the things, the mechanisms that Christina and Riaz have put together. Like, Epic sounds amazing. And what I was going to say, just in response to what they've said, is I often feel that the failure of social policy is in not creating means for us to understand our commonality. And that's what he's talking about. So for instance, gun laws, or, you know, public health
coverage, all of these things, because we've been polarized in the way we are and the way we gather information, a lot of it is by design. And I always lament that, if I think so often, and I've said even to my husband once, the people who are probably very politically diametrically opposed to kind of the way I see the world, I said to my husband the other day, those people are like almost identical to my cousins who I have a bunch of family in Louisiana and, are their economic means are, pretty low and so forth. And I'm like, these people are identical except for what's playing on their radio and, whatever. And the failure is that all of these things create a way that we end up seeing each other as different instead of the same. And we have probably 90% more of the same than different. So I like the idea of the kinds of forums and programming that would foster the forums of something like EPIC.
So you know what? I think we can take this on. This industry can take on depolarization. So I want to wrap this up. Thank you guys. You guys are amazing. I'm going to hand this over to Ann Reedy, our Director of Operations over here at Civic Health Project, to have some closing words. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeff. Wow, this has been really incredible. And the title of our last panel was, where do we go from here? Can the industry take this on? We believe it can. And the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is designed to empower the industry to do just that. Our time is up for today, and I want to thank all of you for showing up, and special thanks to our panelists and moderators for participating in this discussion. Our goal was to jumpstart a conversation about entertainment's unique power to strengthen a fracturing America at this moment. But this is just the beginning, and the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is just getting started. I'm going to say a couple final words, but first we'd love your feedback on today's event and hope you'll participate in a brief survey. If you can grab the link right now in the chat and fill it out, we'd be very grateful. We invite each one of you watching right now to engage with us. We'll be offering events and podcasts for the general public, as well as tailored programming and workshops for creatives and industry executives. Stakeholders throughout the entertainment industry have a critical role to play right now, and we're enlisting as many of you as we can. Social scientists are also a key part of this effort. There's a lot we don't know about how what we're watching on our screens is influencing how we perceive and interact with each other across our divides. Part of our mission at the Center for Entertainment and Civic Health is to equip the industry with measurement tools and data to understand the direct impact of content on Americans' attitudes towards each other and towards democratic norms. So in addition to our public and industry-facing programming, we're supporting research to help us better understand the relationship between entertainment media and our country's civic health. And we're translating that research into actionable strategies for content creators. Our goal is to accelerate the creation of content that fosters societal cohesion, a shared culture of belonging, and pluralist norms, three of the most essential ingredients for civic health. To all of you who work in the entertainment industry, whether as a content creator or an executive, we've assembled a network of leading researchers, social scientists, and expert practitioners who stand ready to help. The Center for Entertainment and Civic Health offers a bridge that makes it easy for you to find and collaborate with them. And as you heard Dave Kaplan and others say, we can do this. Entertainment may be one of the most powerful levers we have right now to fix a broken America. But we can't do it in our silos and bubbles. We need to be listening to and collaborating with people across our divides. And we hope today has inspired you to do just that. So thank you again for being here today. Please sign up to be part of this effort. We're just getting started. And again, please fill out the exit survey. You can grab the link in the chat. Thank you again. Bye-bye.